Hello, everyone. It is 4:01 p.m. and we have quorum, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. If everyone is logged in, I'm going to look for disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, consent items. Would anyone like anything pulled?
I have some questions on, I think, 5, 6, 8, and 9. I'll move the rest.
There's a couple others as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At council, I had asked for an update on from the diversity officer at the next Community Protective Services Committee. Just wanted to confirm where that's at, because I'm not seeing that here.
So that's not in consent items. That would be under additional business because it was after the regular agenda deadline. It would have been after. I know Ms. Major is in her office and ready to come down with that update when we get to the additional business section. Councillor Helmer, did you want anything pulled besides 5, 6, 8, or 9?
I have comments on number 10. I can't vote, so but I do have comments on it.
And do you feel that it should be pulled separate or just make a few comments?
I leave that up to the members of the committee.
Okay. Councillor Armstrong has agreed to move through 2 through 10 with the exception of 5, 6, 8, and 9. And Councillor Helmer, if you'd like to make your comments.
Thank you. Through the chair, regarding the CAT Adoption Center, which seems to be both over budget substantially and delayed substantially. This is not a good thing. You know, I understand there's a real need for this. I think we allocated the appropriate amount of money to make this project happen. I really do not like the idea of using the operating savings from not running something that should have been up and running to cover off the capital cost overruns on a project that's significant, from like 400,000 to 570,000. Like, that's not an insignificant amount of money. I realize in the grand context of everything, it's not a huge amount of money that we're talking about, but I am not comfortable with those kind of overruns and also delays. So I know, and explained in the report, sort of the various things that have come up in executing the project. I think one of the takeaways for me is when we're setting the budgets for these things, we need to perhaps build in some contingency into them when there are things that we don't do that often. Like a CAT Adoption Center is not something that we're going to do all the time, and we don't, maybe not as good at forecasting what the amount of money we might need on the capital side, and also in terms of the phasing, so that we get things up and running. So I just wanted to share that along. I'm not sure. I certainly still agree we need to have a CAT Adoption Center. I don't want to hold it up, but I did want to pass on those comments through the chair to our staff.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments on these items, 2 through 10, except for 5, 6, 8, and 9? Seeing none, we'll put those on the screen for a vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So it is now 4:05. The items that were pulled from consent will drop to the bottom of our agenda and we'll move straight into our delegation. It's a timed item from 4:05 p.m. Mr. Meehan from Museum London, welcome. And I understand you have a 5 to 10 minute presentation and then are available to answer questions. Okay, and just 1 sec before we get started, Councillor Usher.
It is on. Oh, turn it off, sorry.
Thank you.
I just want to be sure, this is one of the presentations that we asked the boards and commissions and our agents to come and present to us, right? That's right. Okay. I just wanted to be sure that he wasn't coming to ask for a couple of $1 million. Just kidding.
Thank you, Councillor. You're correct. This was a presentation at budget time. We had a discussion around connecting with our ABCs and having them come in and share where they're at and what's going on. So this is that presentation, and I'll turn the mic to you.
Great, thank you. And thank you for the invitation to speak today as a representative of one of the city's boards and commissions and give you an overview of Museum London's role in the community and our relationship to the City of London. As requested, I'll keep the slides to a minimum, and we'll be speaking for less than 10 minutes and be happy to answer any questions you have after that. So most of you, I think, are familiar with the museum, but I thought I'd share a few facts and figures to give you a little bit of background about who we are. Our facility is just under 100,000 square feet. It's considered a Class A facility, which is a designation that we receive from the federal government, and which allows us to issue tax receipts for cultural properties, which for us is very important because the museum, like most museums in the country, has a collection that's made up probably about 95% from donations from the public. So that designation is very important to us. We employed 22 full-time and 15 part-time employees. We were established in 1940 as part of the public library on Queens Ave, and the art gallery at that time occupied the second floor of the gallery. The collection itself, though, goes back to 1895. That was the first work that came into the Civic Collection. And between 1895 and 1940, those works were housed in different municipal buildings in the city, including City Hall. We opened our current location as a standalone art gallery in 1980, and then in 1989, we merged with the museums in town and became the London Regional Art and Historical Museums. In 2001, we changed our name to a briefer Museum London. And our collection numbers about 7,000 works of art and about 25,000 objects of material culture, which has a total value of somewhere between $80 and $100 million. In kind of simple and dry terms, I'll quickly read what our bylaw says we do, which is provide a permanent community institution in the service of society and its development for the use of the public, acquire, conserve, research, communicate and exhibit for the purpose of study, education, and enjoyment, material evidence of people and their environment, provide a community facility for acquiring, conserving, preserving, and exhibiting art and artifacts, provide a comprehensive education and research program, and maintain the proper environment for the collections. What that really means is that we are charged with preserving the city's social and cultural history, as well as supporting and cultivating what is happening in our arts and heritage communities today, and to give Londoners the opportunity to experience all of this. We have been fortunate in the past few years to see great strides in our delivery of these goals. On their own, the numbers on the screen look good, but it's more important to show the year-over-year increases to highlight our growth. Our 2015 attendance was just under 108,000 people, a figure up 17% from the previous year. Our public programs grew by 8%, and the number of hours our volunteers donated to the museum grew from 7,500 to over 12,000 hours of service in 2015. This growth supports the project that will take up most of our attention over the next two years, that being the Center at the Forks project. We have provided council with some information regarding this in the past, but I'd like to give you an update on this today. The new Center at the Forks will build on what we've accomplished with our school and public programming to date, but will allow us to expand to become a community cultural hub, a place where Londoners will come to experience a wide range of cultural activities. We've been working with a number of city departments, including the planning department and the culture office, to ensure that the project accomplishes a number of things that we've identified for the museum in the city's strategic plan, as well as the cultural prosperity plan. We've also want to make sure that the project dovetails with the city's plans for the My Dundas initiative, as Dundas Street starts at the Kensington Bridge and runs along the south side of the museum. The Back to the River initiative, which comes up to our western property line, and the Shift project, which will impact 3 sides of the museum site. The Center at the Forks will also allow us to enter into a variety of community partnerships, as partnerships will be essential for the success of the center. We can't do this alone, nor do we want to. We already participate in a wide range of community partnerships, such as Words, London's upcoming Authors Festival, and the Satellite Gallery on Dundas Street, which we operate with Fanshawe College, Beale Arts, and Western University. And we are lead participants in events such as Nuit Blanche, Doors Open, and Culture Days. But we have an opportunity here to create other partnerships, and we're fortunate through Service Canada's job creation program to have a team of 4 people working on community consultations over the next 6 months to see what Londoners would like to see happen at the Centre. The impetus behind the Centre at the Forks project is the understanding that museums today need to remain relevant, be responsive and engaging, and provide value to their local community. The development of a learning center enhances the value and impact that a museum provides by welcoming participation and active engagement of the local community. Our renovation will modernize our infrastructure and will see us do a number of things. We will double the amount of program space we have from 2,100 to 4,400 square feet. We will install a passenger elevator to meet accessibility standards for design of public spaces. We'll design a dedicated yet flexible space to respond to a multitude of uses that our community programming requires. Upgrade our technologies so that we can provide new media to increase visual literacy capabilities. Create a glass wall on the west side of the museum to visually connect the museum interior with the Forks of the Thames, and develop plans for the outdoor programming space on the west side of the museum. We are very excited by the possibilities the Centre at the Forks presents, together with other high-profile civic projects, in contributing to the creation of a dynamic and engaging civic space at the historical heart of London, a cultural and recreational destination of choice, and the ongoing revitalization of the western section of downtown. I'll leave it there for now, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Councillor Usher can start, and colleagues, if you just let me know, I'll put you on the speakers list.
Well, thank you very much. I fully agree with you that you are, what did you say, the cultural heart of London? I think it's more than that. You're right at the heart of London, right down in the middle there, and you could see all the beauty of London from where you are. The restaurant, is it run by the museum or is it contracted out?
The restaurant and the cafe, which is at the front of the museum, are contracted out. So we have an operating agreement with the tenants where we receive a monthly lease payment and a percentage of their gross.
We could only speak one at a time so that we don't interrupt each other. So the numbers that you have, the 107,976, I think it was. How do you calculate those? For example, the reason I ask you is because I go in there all the time and I don't see anything that checks me, but maybe there is something. And on every February, I go in there for a specific activity where we bring in about 300 or 400 people at the beginning of February for Black History opening month. And I don't see anybody checking. Is there something that counts the people as they come in?
Yeah, it's not unlike what the library has at the central branch, which is a people counter. And so it's basically an electronic eye at the front door. And so we count the people coming in, the people going out. And then we've got a formula to take out the numbers for staff who would be coming and going, contractors, things like that, people who are sort of legitimately visitors to the museum to come up with that number.
And lastly, there are some things that I consider historic to London, or maybe it is to the area. And I wonder, I know that there are times when you have artifacts from these overall, but I'm talking about the Underground Railroad, for example, and the Hollow. Things like that. Do you have any remnants or history of anything of those type of things in this museum? I mean, I know that the Hollow is from London, through you, Madam Chair, and the Underground Railroad, we are part of the London of the Underground Railroad, so to speak. But if somebody should come here and they would like to know a little bit about the Underground Railroad without me taking them to Uncle Tom's Cabin or Dresden or somewhere else, is there something in the museum that I could take them to?
We do have works in the material culture collection related to the Black history of London and the region. We don't have anything permanently on display related to that, and that's an entirely separate discussion. But I mean, one of the things that we've really felt London needs is a standalone history museum. I mentioned earlier that back in the 80s, primarily due to economic circumstances, the art gallery and the museums came together under one roof at Museum London. I think there's an opportunity and a desire in the community to see a standalone history museum. We've got a dual mandate, but partly because of our funding structure, we get a fair bit of money for the art side of our organization. There's very little funding for historical material culture exhibitions and collections. So even though we do have exhibitions on at all times from the history collection, what I think we really need in the city is a museum that tells the story of the history of London and is available, 365 days a year. And so we've talked about it a number of times. Years ago, we thought, we could potentially do that at the old library. I mean, in the past few years, we've looked at the old courthouse across the street as a possible site for something like that. The county has done a remarkable job in keeping that facility intact, and there's 4,400 square feet in that building. So it's something that we talk about a lot at the museum. Obviously, it would take resources to make that happen, but I think for the city to be properly served, a standalone history museum would be an important thing.
Well, thank you very, very much for the presentation, and thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to be sure that we keep that restaurant or something. I like to go in there and I look over at the river. It's a beautiful scenery, and I really like to keep it there. So if I have to buy it, just let me know. Just kidding.
Thanks very much for coming and giving the presentation. I certainly appreciate it. The most recent version of your bylaw, I was glad to see you refer to it, came in, I think, around 2012, something like that. How is it working so far? A number of changes are made. Is it working for you as an organization? I know it's not very long, but it covers off a lot of the key aspects.
It's working well for guidance in terms of the activities that we carry out. I mean, we have had one negative impact of the bylaw, something that we didn't see coming, but we were previously incorporated under the province and then moved to a municipal bylaw. In the past, we've been able to receive funding through the Trillium Foundation and receive from fairly significant grants through that program. The last time we applied, which was in fact for this project here, they have a cultural stream with the Trillium Foundation. We were told that because we're more closely associated with the municipality now, we no longer qualify for Trillium funding. So it's an unfortunate thing that happened. It wasn't foreseeable. But that's really the only downside I think that we've experienced.
Could you give me a sense of, so you have the dual mandate in terms of history and then art, and it certainly makes a lot of sense considering that there was the art gallery and the historical museum and they come together. Give me a sense of how you allocate the expenditures to cover off those two different areas, sort of core responsibilities, like what percentage of your budget are you spending on history pieces versus art, if you could express it that way.
For the most part, the budget is kind of split down the middle. I mean, we have, in terms of staffing positions, we have an equal number of positions on the history side and the art side. The only area where it's uneven is we receive funding through the Canada Council and the Ontario Arts Council for visual arts programming. And each year we receive somewhere in the neighborhood of $300,000 from those two bodies for our exhibition program. From the history side, the only program that we receive funding for is through what's called CMOG, the Community Museums Operating Grant Program, and we receive about $50,000 there. So it doesn't allow us the same financial resources to put into our exhibition program on the history side that we would like, but you know, the OAC and the Canada Council are very specific about making sure that it only goes to the visual arts side of the operation. What we try and do is we change over our exhibitions 3 times a year, so our exhibitions run for 4 months, and what we try and do with each period of time is to program thematically. So if we're doing art exhibitions on a particular theme, we try and create historical exhibitions that will complement those so that there's kind of a conversation between the two sides of the operation.
In terms of looking for opportunities for collaboration, and I appreciate that you try to stay focused on how what you're doing fits in with the strategic plan, which is the purpose of these delegations, and I think it's been helpful. We've run into a couple of situations now, and I'm thinking specifically of the South Street Hospital campus, where the municipality is in the process of salvaging a number of pieces of the building, artifacts that are important from a historical perspective, and it's where I think we set aside $200,000 to undertake that salvage operation. Do you think that they're on that kind of project, or potentially in future projects as we have more and more of those things happening, that there's opportunity for Museum London specifically to be working with the city's heritage folks in the planning department on projects like that, to be giving advice, or perhaps storing some of these things we were talking about, where we're going to put all this stuff once we salvage it? I wonder if you could speak to that, whether there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we have done some of that in the past. With South Street specifically, when they were closing, they approached us about doing an exhibition based on the history of South Street. And so the last, I'm trying to remember which year it was, but in the buildings there, museum staff put together an exhibition on the history. It was open for the 2 days of Doors Open, which I think really kind of nicely encapsulated, what it had done for the community over its time. They also invited us in to see what was still left in the hospital, and we acquired a number of objects from that for the permanent collection. But yeah, absolutely. I think anytime something like this occurs in town, it's really important for us to see if there is an opportunity, to capture that history, both in talking to the people who are there, but also obviously the objects. And so anytime something happens like that, we make contact, and sometimes we're successful. When Electromotive Diesel was leaving the community, they had a wonderful mural in their lobby by Selwyn Dewdney. It was a 30-foot mural that we were able to take off the walls and bring into the collection at the museum. When well, we're still in conversation with Fanshawe about some of the things that were in the Kingsmill building and whether or not they can come into the collection. We tried to contact Kellogg's when they were leaving the community. We were told that everything that they had in there of any value was going to Battle Creek, so we weren't successful there. But no, these are real opportunities to hold on to the heritage of the community. So any way that we can work with the city to make more of that happen would be terrific.
Looks like that resolves all the committee's questions. Thank you, Mr. Meehan. And did you have any final words? Okay, thank you very much. So that's up on the screen to be moved, seconded, and we'll open the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. That takes us to item 12, and Mr. Kostovas, I wonder if you had an opportunity, I'm not sure if it was you and I who spoke about the noxious weeds on item 12?
Through the chair, our staff have been on this site on a couple of occasions, as has the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority as well. We were dealing with the matter at hand. I appreciate they want us to take a stronger approach on this. At this point, we still have a outstanding notice of violation on the property. So I would probably respectfully say to refer this to staff or receive and file it, and our staff in enforcement will deal with the matter.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong is interested in referring it to staff, so we'll get that up on the screen. And perhaps we'll refer all of A and B to staff to report back. Councillor Helmer?
So I just have a question for our staff. I realize this is something that they're very familiar with, but I wonder, for the benefit of the committee, if you could explain what exactly the issue is and under what bylaw or legislation you're taking action, because there's a lot of things in the petition and communication from the resident. I want to make sure I understand exactly what the problem is. Are we talking about the weeds are just too long, or there's an issue with the kind of vegetation that it is and it needs to be removed? There's some discussion about whether Upper Thames has jurisdiction here or not. And if you could just explain sort of who's doing what and what the issue is, I think that'd be helpful.
I'll have Heather Chapman speak to the item, but essentially there's, and as the petition says, there's been some plantings on the property. The condominium to the south is planted and naturalized the area behind their units. It's in between their units and the other units, so there's this large area between the two, and a great portion of it is naturalized. There's now a dispute because originally it was all cleared. There was no plantings in the area, and I guess the neighbors to the north are not comfortable with that. They don't like that, and now I've identified potentially some what they deem to be noxious weeds within the naturalized area. Upper Thames has no jurisdiction, and I'll refer to Heather just to speak to what we've done so far and where we're at.
Through the chair, in approximately middle of July, a municipal law enforcement officer attended the property as a result of a complaint of tall grass and weeds, and did do a work order to the property owner, and then in reply to that received a notification from the condominium corporation that they had intentionally done the plantings with the help of Upper Thames as part of a naturalization program. So then we went on to meet with Upper Thames on the site and have a discussion about the actual plantings. A number of photographs were taken, and our municipal law enforcement officer then emailed them to one of the city ecologist planners to say, I don't exactly know all of the species here. I didn't see anything at the time that I would identify as noxious. Do you see anything? And from the photographs, the answer was no at that time. But knowing the growing season of some of the weeds, they might have sprung up afterwards. What we questioned at the time was the buffer strip requirement that comes out of our bylaw as well. It's it's 3 foot, the buffer strip requirement. And because there was no fencing between the two areas, it was kind of a judgment call. And the officer did feel that the property that planted should probably cut back a little bit more to maintain that buffer strip. I do believe the result was, or the officer felt the result was that they had done that and the file was closed at the time. The petition speaks to 2 specific noxious weeds, nodding thistle and Canada thistle. Canada thistle is actually listed, nodding thistle is not a noxious weed. But really, I think we should potentially return to this just to make sure that we're confident that the buffer strip is being maintained. And then at the same time, we can take a look to see if any additional noxious weeds have come into sight. Because particularly ragweed, which is an allergen that I don't see in the petition, but it could be there now.
There are no other comments, Councillor Cassidy. If you could vote on screen to receive the petition and refer the submission to staff.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. So next up is item 13. There's a request for delegation. And Councillor Squire, did you want to speak to this?
Thank you very much for recognizing. Excuse me. This is a matter that I've been involved in helping the London Youth Advisory Council bring this matter forward. They brought it forward, but I'm sort of helping them. And I know that there's matters coming back on November 4th. Is it?
I believe it's the 15th.
Close. November 15th to deal with generally the idea of subsidized bus issues. So my suggestion would be that the delegation be accepted but put over to then for it to be actually made to the committee. Then everything will be together and I'll be back then to hopefully provide some clarity on the issue.
I'm seeing some nods from the committee. Councillor Armstrong has agreed to make that motion. So we'll get that up on the screen and we will make sure that the clerk is in touch with the youth advisory councillors from wards 11 and 8 to make sure they come back on November the 15th, which happens to be my birthday.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Just before Councillor Squire disappears, I have a question, so I just want to make sure that he's there. I want to make sure I understand. This is a request for delegation at this time, not to make a presentation. Am I right? So we're deferring that and we're saying, here's a date that you can come. Yes. And can you remind me why? What's happening on that date? Is it because we're getting a presentation on poverty or social services or something to that effect?
It looks like I have a couple people that are willing to answer. So I'll go first to Councillor Squire and then Ms. Livingston appears that she'd pick up any pieces.
Through the chair, the report's coming back on that date. You remember I made a motion after the poverty panel report for staff to look into the issue of providing free bus for children under 12. So my understanding there'll be a report coming back which will cover that and other subsidies that the city provides. So it'll be sort of a comprehensive report on that issue. This request is separate from that, and there's funding issues with that, and I've been working with the advisory council to find out the cost of that would be involved. So Ms. Livingston, I know, is not reporting back on the same thing as the London Youth Advisory Council, but it's certainly closely related. And I don't know if she has anything to add. Or...
That's part of why I'm asking, because what I'm trying to get at is that what is this report that's coming? Because this is not the only request that has been asking for, say, free transit or reduced transit over the years. And even up until last year, we had a big representation here from the Community Living London asking for lower costs for transit for the poor and for people with disability and homeless and so on. So I'm just wondering whether, whatever this report is, whether it's going to cover the overall or what is it going to cover? That's all.
Can you give us a teaser of the report?
Yes, through the chair. So the report will really address two specific directions from council. One was that we return with a revised model for subsidized transit. Right now, it supports two particular groups, those folks, people that are blind and seniors. And we were asked to return with a revised model. That's part of the report. And the second part is to respond to the direction to look at transit for those 12 and under for free, as well as 13 and under for free. So the report will address all of those pieces. Councillor Squire is quite correct. It will not address this particular ask, but given the context, it, in my opinion, it would make sense to hear it all at the same time.
And that's good information, because what I'm hearing then is, because I was of the opinion that this request would be mostly for, let's say, high school students' age. And what I'm hearing here is that that report will not address that portion of it, that block, so to speak. So I just wonder where we're going to go at that point in time. We're going to have this report, and then we're going to have this delegation as well. Is this the general idea if we pass this?
So, Councillor, it would be my intent, because we're having that report back and because the delegation request is of a similar nature, that we would receive the report from staff. There may be all other delegation requests from groups that we've seen in the past who want to speak to the contents of the report. And then any direction we would give would be after the report from staff and any delegations we entertain. Does that help?
Well, it does help, but I'm still a little concerned, because this is not something new. I've been dealing with this for over 10 years now, and we have not been able to come up with what I would refer to as a solution or an adequate solution. And it sounds to me that, and maybe this is the way we have to go, I'm not saying no, but it sounds to me that this report is going to be right around what this presentation will be all about. It will surround that, but it won't address this. And I don't know what the address will be, what you'll come up with. But if this advisory committee is going to come and ask for, I'd use the word subsidized transit for, let's say, high school students, for example, what I'm hearing from Ms. Livingston is that we're going to address everything except high school students. So now we're going to have the report, and we're going to have the presentation, and then we're going to have to refer the whole thing back to staff, it seems to me. So I'm just trying to clear this up in my mind so that I understand before I vote what I'm voting on.
So at this point, we are not dealing with the report. That will come in November. So we, perhaps against my better judgment, did ask for the teaser of what the report's going to be. We will get that report in November in completion. At this point, the only thing we're dealing with is a request from the public for delegation. So we have decided that because we have a similar item on the agenda, that may be the appropriate time, because that may, when they see that report, that may change the context of their delegation or not. But to receive the report now, I don't know that that's going to change the report that's going to come forward. This is, I think you need to treat as a separate request for delegation. So to me, your vote should be on whether or not you would like to invite these delegates to attend the November 15th meeting. That's what's on the screen. Councillor Squire?
Just to be clear, this is a group that came to the London Transit Commission, made a presentation with regard, very clear to the issue of providing a discount on high school passes. So in furtherance of that, they're coming here to make a similar presentation because, quite frankly, the London Transit Commission said, look, we're not the ones who would fund this. It would have to come from some money from the city. So what I've done since then is meet with them, work with them, talk to London Transit, find out when they come back, they'll have numbers. There'll be numbers to say, if you wanted to do this, this is what it would cost. But I don't think anybody's prejudging what the decision of this committee might be on any of those issues. And I think what the chair, maybe other groups will come forward, but at some point it's going to be here. But I can promise you that I'll work with them and make sure that what they come back with is comprehensive in terms of giving an idea of the money that it would cost to do something like this. The reason Mrs. Livingston is not doing that is she was not asked to do that by council. and she has a certain amount of money, and she's quite properly coming back on the issues that she was asked to speak on. So I think it's going to be fairly straightforward, and I think I'm just trying to help them get their request through to where it needs to get through, and then it's up to the committee what they do.
Okay, so if you could vote on screen.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, the next item is a submission from MP Irene Matheson, which I know everyone will have reviewed. Is there a motion for receipt? Councillor Armstrong? That will come up on screen in just a moment. Any comments on the report? It is a letter.
Thank you for the letter. Perhaps the chair could send.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Madam Chair, perhaps you can send a letter thanking the MP for sending the letter.
I will ensure that Ms. Matheson's office knows that we received the letter and reviewed it. Thanks, Councillor Usher.
I think it's a little bit more than that, because one of the things that she's asking here is that I'm asking you, as a council, to consider making an official submission to the committee, whereby by presenting to the committee in person or by submitting a brief. So I think that that's what she's asking for. So my feeling is that just by saying that we receive this is not enough. So here's my question, Madam Chair. Is there a potential for us to, either through council or through staff, to make a submission at this, to make presentation at this committee, or to write a letter, a brief to this committee? Because I think that what she's saying, and I agree, is that they need to hear from us as a council, as this corporation in the City of London. And I'd like her to feel that we are responding to that. We're either going to do it or we're not going to do it. If we just write her and say, we receive it or take note, I don't think that's enough. Let's say that we can do it or we will not do it. So maybe we could ask staff if there's a potential for doing something like that, because I think that staff may have done something like this in the past.
Through the chair, if council wishes us to prepare a submission that summarizes the London for All plan and submit it, we would happily do it at your direction.
Councillor Cassidy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you through you to Councillor Usher for bringing this up. I think it especially MP Matheson, she was quite supportive of this report from the very beginning, from the moment that it was in the draft form. She was quite supportive and had made a commitment at the when the report was finally released in its entirety. She made a commitment to bring this to Ottawa. So I think it's a good opportunity. I think it's a good opportunity for as Ms. Livingston said, to prepare something, but I would like to go a little bit further and perhaps ask Ms. Livingston if she could provide, maybe report back on what a delegation might look like, what her thoughts might be on not just sending a report to this committee, but actually sending a delegation of Londoners to speak to this committee. I think that might be a great idea, especially considering that this report was put together by the community, through the community, with the input of the community and direct involvement of the community. So it might be worth considering, rather than just having a representative council or a representative of staff, but to have a group of Londoners attend this committee and make the presentation.
So Councillor Cassidy and Usher, you're the mover and seconder on this motion. It sounds like you may want to amend the motion to include something else. Do you guys want to work out what you would like to include and get that to the clerk? And Ms. Livingston, did you want to comment on that?
Through the chair, certainly we'll report back on whatever you would request that we do. Perhaps it might be helpful in the motion just to indicate the involvement of our intergovernmental team in that work.
Okay, Councillor Helmer would like to speak.
So my understanding is that you see in the letter from Ms. Matheson that there's supposed to be 16 meetings where they're going to be hearing from witnesses. I believe 3 of these meetings have already happened, and one of them happened today, and one of them's happening a couple days from now. So I think time is of the essence in terms of, and we're not the most nimble organization in terms of, get a report back, and then 2 cycles later, well, it could take a while, and I want to make sure that we still have an opportunity to participate. I'm not sure exactly how long they're planning to have these meetings happen, especially if you're talking about somebody appearing in person. That's different than submitting a brief, which seem to be the 2 options.
I apologize, Chair. I'm unclear of the timelines of all of the meetings, but if there is an issue of timing, then I would respectfully suggest just direct us to do it, and we'll undertake whatever the wish of council is.
Thank you, Chair. For me, I'm looking at it in a way where I think our federal representatives here could probably, tap into those members or the people they want, and if they want to bring them up to Ottawa, I think they could do that. I think that might be within their purview a little bit more than us sending up versus, I think if they want to say, okay, we're the federal government, we have a bigger budget, let's pluck some people from London and talk about if that's the strategy or that's the case. But I think us sharing the information is fine, but I don't think we need to really necessarily ourselves send, a plane load of people or people in a plane to have that conversation. I think the feds can pay for that.
Councillor Cassidy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Respectfully, I think that the letter says that the committee is inviting individuals and organizations and municipalities to come and make a delegation to the committee. So they've sent out this invitation and they're looking for people to respond. And then MP Matheson has taken it upon herself to focus on the London for All report. So I would, let me see what the motion says. I like the motion as it is, and make an appropriate submission, and perhaps even add to it, say something like that staff can form a delegation, or possibly form a delegation to present the submission. And then that way it's leaving it up to staff if we decide to do it as people or just paper. But I think we need to leave that option open. I think London did a fabulous thing with this report. I don't think a lot of communities have done this. I went to a poverty conference in Edmonton in April, and they had a booklet prepared guiding communities to create a poverty reduction strategy. London had, through its process, had done almost every single one of the recommended things that they had in that booklet. So I think what London did as a community here with the London for All report is as MP Matheson is trying to do, is worth crowing about.
So I believe that adjusted wording is on screen. Councillor Usher?
Exactly what Councillor Cassidy talked about is what I was trying to get at. And I think that the word that's missing in here is, I would like to see specifically that we say make a presentation or delegation to HUMA. HUMA is the acronym for the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disability. And they will begin to meet this fall, whether that's last month or this month or whatever. It doesn't give any specific date when we can make presentations, but
I want to be sure that we identify that that's the committee that we're talking about in this motion. And everything, I know it's in here, but I'd just like to see it up here.
Okay, I have, I need your microphone. So you're looking to add
Yuma?
Sorry.
HUMA as a separate amendment? Because I see someone,
Include a delegation to HUMA.
Yeah.
okay. And one of our colleagues would like this split out, I believe, a little bit. So I need some clarity on which pieces you would like split out.
The delegation part.
So we need the mover and seconder to back out. We're gonna add HUMA and we're gonna separate it out for voting purposes. Counselor Armstrong.
Just wonder, do we have any understanding the standing committee, is it a traveling standing committee? Because quite often they are. So I just want to understand do we have any information? Okay, so fact is, when they said make a presentation, they may be coming to London at some point, or to Windsor, or to Kitchener-Waterloo. And so that would really sort of change how some people might look at it, depending if it is, and that's not in here, so perhaps that kind of information would be valuable. It's unfortunate it's not in the letter as to where and when. Because we don't have the answers to that question. Because if it's London, I think some people might look at it differently if they're coming to London. But Ottawa is a different situation, because now we have to sort of talk about, is it staff that's going, or is it members of council, or members of our poverty group, or who? And then there's costs involved too. I mean, how many people are going to go? I don't know how many people our staff might recommend and who they might recommend. So in any event, it would have been nice to have more information about if we're going to look at sending people outside of London versus being in London. So I'm just throw that out there. I'm sure others might have some thoughts on that.
It does look like you sparked a number of comments, and I'm actually going into my own email because I believe we all actually received this email, and I bet you the date and locations for the meetings would be listed on that. So some of your colleagues would like to speak, and I'll dig through my own email while they do that. Councillor Cassidy and then Helmer.
I believe the original email said Ottawa, that she would like a delegation to come to Ottawa to present.
Just to put people's minds at ease, I've never had the pleasure of presenting at a standing committee, but I do understand what's involved. And first of all, you have to be invited. So what we're talking about is requesting to appear, and then if the committee decides to invite somebody, then you get to go. And if you are invited, your expenses to come and appear as a witness are covered. And usually if the individual, they'll cover one person. If it's more than one person from an organization, they usually will cover 1 or 2 people and not, 10 people. But if you are going to go as a witness to a standing committee, the federal government's going to cover the cost of travel, and you don't have to worry about that.
So next I have Councillor Armstrong.
Well, that would be good if they covered the costs, and that would be for any costs the municipality incurs, or is that for individuals or groups or whatever? That, if anybody has some information on that. And if it's only in Ottawa, then that's good to know.
Oh, do we want to separate?
Okay, so it's got to be put on the floor and then it'll be separated for voting out. I have Councillor Usher and then Salee.
I don't want to delay this too much. I think that so long as we have humor in there, if it's going to happen in Ottawa, it happens in Ottawa. If it's happening in London or Toronto or somewhere, it happens. The important thing is that we know that it's that committee, and if they're only meeting in Ottawa, then we'll go to Ottawa. If they're going to go around and they come to London, then we'll go and meet them, And if we don't want to go, then we'll send the submission. It's just, to me, that's the way we should accept this. But let's just leave it at this for now.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Salee?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think you guys, if you had the other screen, I think you split it wrong. I was saying that the submission is fine. What I was trying to get at was who goes, that delegation piece was where I wanted to vote on it separately. From the previous screen, it didn't show that. It said receive the report. I don't want to receive the report. I want to do the first part, but just the delegation was the part that I had. And for me, I'd prefer if there's a will to amend it, I would prefer grassroots people go up. I don't think we need more people from the civic administration side to go up. I think the people who are, from everyday Londoners and the people who have those lived experiences would probably be more beneficial to the committee.
So the clerk actually did adjust the wording to say City of London and not civic admin. So I think, sorry, that's not civic admin. So the decision would be made at another point, and it's not necessarily civic admin, but perhaps some of our panel members, or it could be anybody from the City of London. And that decision would be made separate from this. So that wording will come up in the next part. So I think to keep this focused, if we can do the receiving the communication, which I think is straightforward, and then we'll put the next part up and see what amendments we need to make on that, because I don't believe there's an amendment on receiving the communication. So we'll open that vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And then we'll put B on the floor and we'll look to see if there's any amendments. And Councillor, if you wanted it separated out differently, if you could let the clerk know, and I'll go to Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I know you've already said this, I just wanted to try through you to sort of give some comfort to Councillor Salee that the decision point will come at another time, and so we don't have to, we might not have time, we don't have time for this to come to another decision, so, I see your point now. So, yeah, I believe Councillor Salee would like to, submission. I think he wants submission and then C, and potential delegation by the City of London.
So just to be clear, this is to approve a submission. Okay, we can open the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
We're just getting the next part up. Counselor, can you help us with the wording? Because there's concerns I hear that there may not be time in a future date to confirm the delegations. So did you want delegations to read something specific? So do you have a thought there?
To the chair, I don't even know who would be suggested to send. So it's hard for me to kind of put it that way, because you're I can't just pick a random person who's either involved or not involved. I'm not sure, and I'm not sure who would be the decision-making body, who would be then doing it. But if it's not costing the city of London anything, then that's not an issue to me. I guess it's just, I would just not want, civic administration to go. I'd prefer grassroots people to go, is kind of where I believe on this front.
With the hopes of not complicating things unduly, I would say that perhaps people who worked on the poverty panel and brought the whole thing forward, pretty good people to look to maybe go as witnesses, and it's going to be up to the committee who actually comes. It really, we're deciding who do we want to ask. Anybody. I could just go online and say, I want to appear at this committee and talk about this issue. I don't need permission from anybody. Anyone can do that. It's really, for our decision making is, of the people who've been involved in this plan that we want to talk about to the committee, who should we send as a delegation? And I think any of the people who are involved in the Mayor's Advisory Panel on Poverty would be great people to send to that. And there may be other people too, and I don't think we need to really figure that out right now. I think civic administration, knowing and working with those people, they can sort out who they think would be good witnesses. I don't know, I think it's fine.
So the clerk has listened to the comments and put something up on screen. If there's no further comments, I will open that for a vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
So as I indicated, the leftover consent items, we're going to drop to the bottom. Councillor Salee had raised another additional matter which did not make our added agenda deadline, and that was in regards to the position with HR. So I do understand Ms. Major is here, and that's to fulfill an obligation from the council meeting to report out with an update on the diversity officer position. Is that the one you were looking for, Councillor Salee? Okay, so I'm just going to pull the resolutions up, but I believe in general we're looking for an update, so I'm going to let Ms. Major start that update.
Well, thank you, and through the chair, I understand that at council last week, Councillor Salee raised an inquiry with respect to the position that we have advertised regarding doing work in support of our workplace diversity and inclusion plan, and also asked for some information with respect to the strategies that we are utilizing to assist in the attraction and retention of qualified individuals. So that was raised at last week's council, and so we're here to provide you an update. I have my colleagues with me today to help out in terms of any details that you may have. In respect to the position, I'm pleased to advise that we have filled the position, and to my right is Salia Khan, who has joined our team effective September the 12th, and she is in the role of Specialist Organizational Development, Workplace Diversity and Inclusion. She comes to us from the Ontario Police College, where she was an instructor in race relations and adult education for the past 12 years. Her other positions have included a coordinator with the Islamic Society of North America and program coordinators with Settlement and Integration Services. She has also been an active member in both the London and Hamilton communities, supporting diversity and inclusion in each of those cities. So as I mentioned, she has been with us not quite a month, actually, just over a month. And during that time, we have been orienting her to the organization and giving her an opportunity to meet with individuals that she will be working with in terms of the activities under the strategic plan, and in particular, our workplace diversity and inclusion plan. In respect to the inquiry regarding strategies, regarding what we are doing to attract and retain individuals who are reflective of the diversity in our community. She will be working together with other members of the Human Resources and Human Rights team in terms of developing our multi-year recruitment outreach plan. And she will work with other members of the team. And that plan actually will focus on ensuring or enhancing our relationships with the demographic groups that we have found to be underrepresented in our workforce census and survey, and which will hope to aid in the attraction and retention of individuals in our community.
Thank you, Ms. Major.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if you recall, some time ago, we were talking about this back in February, some time ago. So I did have a few questions. I'm just curious, I'll just ask them. You know, I want to know what took so long in the process to get to this point, because from my understanding, you know, I think the city manager said something of he understands where council is on this and he's going to turn up the heat or something with the faucet, or some sort of metaphor he used. I can't remember. But my concern is that, you know, it took us a while, and here we are in September, and this is finally the first time meeting her at this committee, and there's been other opportunities where I think the diversity office should have been here, whether we were talking about immigration, whether we were talking about the LDRAC name change, and they would have been able to provide input to help council make a better and more informed decisions. So for me, you know, I want to know where we're at, the current state, what's the plan, the timelines, the measurements, and, you know, recognizing that we need to move more aggressively. And then at the time when it's appropriate, I want to ensure that we get at minimum quarterly updates on this, because this was something that council had set aside significant amount of resources, and I think Londoners want to see results, and I want to see results. So I want to make sure that we're following this very closely, because we've made a significant investment, and I think we're going to be held accountable to that. So I want to make sure we want to see the output of that, and I want to see exactly where we're at, because I could tell you a lot of Londoners are asking that, and if you read the paper today, Londoners are asking again. So I think it's valid questions, and I want to clearly know exactly the plan, the timelines, and the measurements, because I was talking about this for a while now, and I want to see results, and Londoners want to see results.
Thank you, Councillor Slee. So I don't know that your questions are from Ms. Khan. Sorry, your questions are for our new employee who's been here for 4 weeks?
Yes, it's for our employee who's now looking over the diversity office. The first question was to HR, Ms. Major, and Longs, regarding why it took so long to get here.
And so just before we get to that, because I want you to be able to get your answers, I am looking at the resolution from the February meeting, and I understood that the report back was due 1 year after the hiring? Was your understanding a little different?
So the motion that I had, what I requested with respect to the status of the implementation of the diversity officer and the strategies that will be utilized to assist with the attraction, retention of qualified individuals who reflect the diversity of our community, and how the role of the diversity officer will evolve. That's what I had asked at council. I recognize that Councillor Zafman was going to have a 1-year report card, but if you need me to put another motion, I'll bring another motion right now to give that direction, to clear cut. And if I need to pull back from the other ones, I just want to ensure that we're actually having measurements and know where we're at, so we're all able to describe that to the community, because this should be a position that the community can follow and the community can understand what we're doing and how we're going to achieve that.
Thank you for clarifying, Ms. Major.
Thank you, and through the chair, to clarify, Ms. Khan is working in the area of workplace diversity and inclusion, and I understand the councillor spoke about immigration services, and that is not within the scope of her responsibilities. Her focus will be on workplace diversity inclusion plan and issues, and I believe that when we reported, as the chair has indicated, through the Corporate Services Committee, that the resolution of council was that we do report back in a year in terms of providing those updates. So we were under the understanding that we were reporting in that time frame, and just to clarify, the scope and focus of her work will be with respect to workplace issues and as the initiatives as identified under Workplace Diversity Inclusion Plan.
to there. So that sounds like there's not going to be, I'm not going to get those questions from the diversity officer answered, is that my understanding? And I think when I was talking about the position, when I first had introduced it with my colleague, Councillor Squire, it talked about it not just being focused on HR and talking about the other elements. We're talking about significant investment that we made in that area. And if we're just going to just talk about just the diversity within the workforce, there was other elements that were raised, and I talked about it 3 or 4 different times. If we need to pull the tapes, or if I need to give you another motion, I'd be more than happy to do that. But I thought that it was clear what the intent was of the position, and it was a little bit more different. And I think that's what the community had as an expectation, that this was the diversity officer for the City of London. And yes, one area would be to make sure we have a more diverse workforce. But if you need to pull up the old original motion, you'd see that that was the intent, was to also have that external piece. And it's going to touch on different areas because it's diversity. When we talk about immigration portal, when we talk about all these areas, you can't start talking about it and put it in a silo. It has to be overarching and overreaching. If not, then it's not going to be effective, and then we're wasting our time. So I want to be very clear that I'll put a motion right now to get quarterly updates. And from September, if that's what I need to do, I'll look for a seconder. That's fine. And if I can't get it here, then I'll bring it up again at council. And I also will ask again, what's the plan, the timelines, and the measurements, and how aggressive we're going to work on this, because I was very clear back in February.
Thank you. So you're welcome to make any motion that you would like. I am looking at the resolution from the February 2016 council meeting. That resolution does have 5 parts, and then part D, I think, is what you're referencing, and that's the 3-pronged approach as committed by the city manager. And I'm looking for you, Councillor, to kind of correct me if I'm wrong. So part 1 of D, and I believe I've asked the clerk to email this to you because I'm not sure if you got it. I did have to ask for it today, was the implementation of Ms. Khan's position. Part 2 was increased supports for immigrant, newcomers, international students. And then part 3 was the development of implementation of local diversity and inclusion plan through the implementation of a steering committee modeled after the community economic roadmap, with the goal of bringing a final report back in early 2017. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. I'm happy to allow conversation, but I think that Ms. Khan's piece is part 1, and the city manager has responsibility for part 2 and 3. Part 2 has been delegated to Ms. Daters-Beer, and do you want to comment on part 3 as well? Please.
Through the chair, I'm happy to speak to the part 2, which is the immigration strategy that's in council's strategic plan. And so we have a manager of strategic programs and partnerships who we've recently hired, and we're hiring a specialist for immigration to support the immigration work in partnership with the London and Middlesex Local Implementation Partnership. So we have a role role that we've always played in supporting immigration and a broader piece in developing the immigration strategy as per the direction from City Council.
So I'll still put my motion, and I want quarterly updates. I think that's an important piece. The community needs to know where we're at. We need to be more aggressive. My fear is that we were talking about this back in February, and here we are in September. What is the measurements? What have we done? Someone can't even just tell, okay, if the diversity officer can't give me that, so then can the head of HR say to me, what's the timeline? What's the measurements? How do we say what we're going to be achieving? People ask in the community, and they're going to come to me, and they're going to say, so what's this position doing? They didn't even know about it until they read about it in the Free Press, because the diversity officer happened to be at that event. I didn't even know about it, and I'm a counselor. So I just want to make sure that we can be held accountable to the community, because they're going to say, you spent over 100,000 or whatever the number is, and they want to know that we are actually going to deliver and have a more diverse workforce. I just want to know what's the plan, what's the timeline. If you need me to put in a motion, then put in the motion, exactly that, because I get these questions all the time and I don't have the answers. And quite frankly, my concern is that it's going to get to 2018, 2019, and we're going to still look the same. There's not going to be many changes that we can see. So I have those concerns. We need to actually deliver. And, that's quite frankly, why I had not wanted the position to be in HR in the first place, and why I had put that motion that was only supported by Councillor Helmer. But anyone else around this horseshoe can put that up for reconsideration to make sure that Londoners actually, and you heard at the London Racism Forum that people want to see more and move up and see us do a little bit better, but I'm not seeing it at this stage.
Thank you. The clerk is working on some wording. I'm gonna see if there's some other comments, if that's okay, Counselor, while we get that wording in the works. Counselor Armstrong?
Well, first of all, I want to welcome Mrs. Khan to City of London Corporation, and we all look forward to working with you, and best of luck on your endeavors. And I just wanted to give our staff an opportunity to perhaps respond, because we've heard from the counselor on this issue and putting some wording together. But I'd like to kind of get an understanding of, and I don't know if this is right, the metrics you would use in these quarterly reports. Like, how would that work? How would you go out there and report back, and are you already tracking that kind of information, or would you have to set up a system? You know, what would happen?
So through the chair, we have been working on what we understood the direction of council was in February this year, which was to report back within 1 year of that date on a regular basis thereafter with respect to the metrics and results. So we were working towards those targets. But what I can tell you is in our workplace diversity and inclusion plan, we did set out measurements that we would be using, and you've probably seen that document before. And we identify matters or measurements that we can look at, or benchmarks that we can look at to see whether we are making progress towards broader representation of our community in our workplace. So things that we will be looking at and have already identified are statistics on recruitment, on our recruitment outreach activities. The statistics from the employee demographics related to the dimensions of diversity. So when we have done a previous workforce census, we will be doing another workforce census, and we will be able to measure the progress that we've made between the two. So those are some of the measurements that we have identified, and as we indicated, we had understood we were coming back in February 2017 with a full plan for you with respect to those, and then how we will provide regular updates to you thereafter.
Well, I guess the thing is, we have already sort of set out the criteria that our staff were going to follow, report back in a year, as I hear, and so now we're looking at changing things. And I think, first of all, I think these things take time to set up, implement. Obviously, we're hiring new staff, and so you know, to suddenly go from a report back in a year, which is what the direction of council apparently was, to changing that to quarterly reports. There must have been some rationale why report back in a year. Because, I mean, one could say report back every week or every other week, and so on. So now quarterly. I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense. And so I'd like to hear from staff, did the year timeline that council said earlier, did you feel that was adequate for you to make progress in these areas? And was that a reasonable timeline so that, you know, you would have time to make progress, gather the data, and put together appropriate reports? And would you find coming back quarterly to report on the issue, if we change it now, would you find that would eat up a lot of your time, that you could be better spent working on the issue rather than reporting on the issue?
So I do just want to be really clear that the report back, as originally directed by council, should be in 3.5 months. So I don't think by saying quarterly, we're adjusting that original timeline, except perhaps by about 2 weeks, which I'm sure our colleague would be okay with, that 2-week delay for that first report to come back based on the meeting schedule. So what he's asking for now is quarterly updates moving forward after that. Okay, did somebody want to speak to that?
Through the chair, I think in terms of the councillor's questions, part of the rationale, and it was council who placed the timeline to us, and we were comfortable with that, recognizing that, you know, we had to recruit a position. Sometimes recruitments take some time. We wanted to have a candidate in place to allow them to orient themselves, build a plan, and have an opportunity to work towards that and make some progress. And that's what has happened.
Can I stop you for a second, Ms. Major? I'm sorry, something is becoming very clear to me, and I don't know if it is to my colleagues or not, but we're speaking, I think, about two completely separate things as per the resolution. So it is all under the diversity umbrella in the original thing, but I think the thing that is coming back in February of 2017 that I understand perhaps from Councillor Salee what he would like quarterly updates on is the development and implementation of a local diversity and inclusion plan through the implementation of a steering committee modeled after the community economic roadmap with the goal of bringing that final report back early 2017. So I don't know if Ms. Khan and what her role is under that, or if Ms. Major, if that's something you would rather the city manager speak to, and so this committee could certainly ask for quarterly reports from that committee, and we can do so at today's meeting, but I don't know if we're all on the same page or if I helped.
Thank you, Chair. I believe we are talking about two things, and so the reporting that we have done with respect to workplace diversity inclusion has been, because it's human resources, human rights, has been through the Corporate Services Committee, and that's where we have traditionally reported. I believe you're correct that the other matter is something that Mr. Zuda and Ms. Graham could speak to.
Councillor Salee.
Just to provide some clarification, I do want to see us, I'll give you an example. London Police Service Board, right? You know, it's one of the areas where they're trying to attract and be more diverse. So at their police board meetings, the last one at least, and I think they do it quite often, quite regularly, they actually provide the stats, they show the targets, they showed exactly what they're doing, and they said, hey, our last intake of hires, 26% were visible minorities, 28% were women. It was something around those numbers, not exact, but that's what they did, and they were able to say what they're doing, and they said it in a public setting. So I think for us, as a city of London, we're way behind on the curve when it comes to that front, and being able to show those metrics and being able to be accountable to the diverse members of the city and be accountable to Londoners in general to show them what we're trying to do. All I'm saying is, I don't even know what the plan is the first thing. So I just want somebody to tell me what we're doing. And then what I'm trying to get at is say, what's the timelines? What's the metrics? How do we measure this? Because again, we just cut a check for $100,000. And then once the 1 year mark comes, people are gonna look to us and say, what's the output? What have you done? And if I can't say I haven't done anything, how do I justify those things? So that's why I need to say and be able to say, this is what we're doing. We're measuring it. We're paying attention to it. This is tax dollars that are important, and we need to be accountable. And I think by doing something that I'm trying to propose here, we can achieve that versus just coming back in 2-3 years and having hired maybe one person.
If you wouldn't mind reviewing the revised wording that's on the screen, I had some other speakers over here. Was it Councillor Cassidy or Councillor Usher? Yep, go ahead. Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I'm flabbergasted right now because I really don't know where we are. And I think that if I don't, I wonder where the people who are listening to us now. Like Councillor Sally, most of you know that I get phone calls almost every week. I won't try to exaggerate and say every day, but I did get a phone call today, and there's going to be a write-up about diversity in the Free Press tomorrow. And they're going to include us, because they're going to write about us and Hamilton, and I think it's Waterloo. And I don't know what stance it's going to take, but it bothers me that I can't understand where we're heading right now. I read this here, and I think I understand where it's trying to go, but it's not, if I was to take it and really try to understand what am I really asking for here, it just seemed to me that there are some words that are missing. But then we have this other motion that was made way back, 8 months ago, whatever it was, and
I'm very concerned. I'm wondering if this is going to confuse that, or this is an addition to that, or whatever. What I care about is what we end up with. And for years, I've been singing to the non-choir. Some people read the same song sheet, others don't, about inclusivity and diversity in this workplace of the Corporation of the City of London. And I thought that earlier this year, with the motion that we got, that was going to move us in the direction that we should be moving. Not necessarily where I want to go, but the direction that we should be moving. But it bothers me now if we're going to try to change direction. What I hear from Ms. Major is not what I thought that we were heading to, but maybe I'm misunderstanding. Maybe I'm not getting all the details, because earlier in the year, I thought we were going to be heading in that direction. One of the things that we talked about earlier this year is that, Mr. Zuliman said it right there, we're going to begin to be bold. We're going to begin to be bold to put these into action. And I'm not going to say what these are. We all know what it is, but we know the direction. Look, there are 16.1% visible minorities in London, and then there are other diversity entities. If we cannot do something about that as the Corporation of the City of London, don't expect anybody else in London to do anything about it. We've got to move in the direction where the people who provide the market, who rent the houses, purchase the cars, purchase the groceries, are considered a part of this demographic and therefore considered a part of the workforce. That's the direction, in simple terms, that I want to see us going. So I don't want to confuse the issue. If our human resources have a direction that they're going to go to meet that, because that's what I thought. I thought that we're going to find a direction, being bold, and maybe even have to make some changes to get there. If this is just a reporting structure, and I do have a lot of respect for where Councillor Sally wants to go, because he's just taking up from where I've been trying to go for a long time, then I'm all for it. But I'm not so sure that when I read this, I'm understanding everything that it says there. So, and part of it is because we're making this on the fly.
Yeah.
If I had an opportunity to sit down with this overnight, it would probably be a whole different story. But we're trying to come up with, this is a very, very complicated and very important motion. We need to get it right. Otherwise, if we are going to give this to staff, and staff will say, well, that's what we said, and then we walk away and say, well, that's not really what we meant. We're going to be in trouble the same way we are right now. So I want to be sure that whatever we vote on here is the right thing, but I also want, like you, Madam Chair, to understand, is this supposed to be what we asked for before, or something parallel, or something adjunct to it? I don't know. That's what I need to understand. Whatever we leave with here, I and you and everybody else here will have to be able to explain it to the person out on the street or the person in the mall, because they're going to ask me and they're going to ask you, regardless. So we need to be able to understand where we are, where this is going to lead us, and how we're going to get there, and what this report is. I'm not sure that I understand everything that's written here right now. So I'll leave it at that.
Councillor Slade, did you want to speak to that?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor Usher, for the question. So to clean it up, maybe what I'll propose is that just specifically around the workplace diversity piece, so not the other piece, just the piece around how we're doing, what's our performance, how many people have we hired, you know, are we what's the measurements? Like the issue that first stems is I had thought when I had indicated to the city manager at the last council meeting that I wanted an update, because I wanted an update, I wanted at least someone to tell me this is the plan. I don't want to wait till February and hear that this is the plan, and I'm like, whoa, that was a plan that really, you know, didn't work out, or maybe I could give you some input or kind of let you know where I'm thinking about, or kind of share the perspective of the community. So that's why I was hoping to hear something today from the diversity officer. They haven't even been able to turn on the microphone and to speak and to say that this is where we're at, this is where we're hoping to go, this is some of the plans, this is what we're hoping to do. Like, have some sort of conversation, because this is a diversity position that's supposed to deal with the community. This isn't like something that's, I don't know, like roads or something where you don't have to give me the details of what's going to look underneath, but this is something that people need to understand is actually going to be tangible. And quite frankly, the police service is doing a better job at us, is actually explaining that and doing that. So it's very confusing to me how we can't even do that. And all I'm asking to make it simpler for my colleague is just to give me those metrics and those quarterly updates on that information and whatever they want to put at the stage. But if they're not going to give me a plan now, or give me an update, I want to know had they given me a plan today and given me some sort of indication of what we're doing, I wouldn't have had to have done this. I would have been more than happy to wait up until February. But no one's telling me anything other than we're going to come back to you in February. Just an idea, like give me something. Like there's absolutely like nothing that I'm hearing.
Councillor Cassidy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I understand my colleague's frustration and where he's coming from. Absolutely. I'm just hoping to turn down the temperature a little bit and recognize that we have a brand new employee in the room. She's been given a really important task. It's really important not only to Councillor Sully, it's important to this council, and it's important to the City of London. And she's been in the job a month, and part of her job is to come up with a plan, I believe, is to, I know that there is an existing diversity and inclusivity program in place at the City of London, but part of Ms. Khan's role, I believe, is to develop that even further and do some of the things, or all of the things that Councillor Sully is looking for. I just want to recognize that she's been on the job a month, and I don't want to, I don't want to scare her away.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Helmer.
Thank you very much. And through the chair, I would like to echo Councillor Armstrong and say welcome aboard to Celia. I think that I heard the title of the position early on, and I just want to go back to that. I know we've had a lot of discussions since we started talking about this topic, but could you just read me back what the title is specifically so I can...
Ms. Khan's title is Specialist Organizational Development, Workplace Diversity and Inclusion.
So I went back and looked at the resolution. It was a bit of a different title when we passed it. And it said at that time, Specialist Talent, Diversity, Inclusion, and Engagement. And I wonder what's going on there. I think, if I remember correctly, Mr. Prince, your title is Organizational Development, Workplace Diversity, Inclusion. Like that's essentially you were doing that job or are doing that job now. So I was understanding that this new position was going to be slightly different. And maybe I just don't understand exactly. I don't want to get too hung up on titles. It's more important what people are doing. But we did pass a specific motion that had these keywords, and we spent some time talking about them in the discussion.
So through the chair, my understanding was that the title changing was to reflect more closely the work that the individual would be doing, which was the focus. And I know there's been discussion that the individual is community focused, but it is, as my understanding is, and the discussion at council at the time, I think Councillor Usher mentioned it, there was a three-pronged approach. Sorry, I wanted to look at you. So there was a three-pronged approach, and the focus of the first prong was internally on workplace initiatives and the Workplace Diversity Inclusion Plan. The second part, or the second prong, focused in Ms. Datter's Bear area, as she's indicated, and the third part of the plan focused on the development of a community diversity and inclusion plan. All of those prongs coming together to be aligned to advance what we want to do internally in the organization and what we want to do in the community. And so, so Ms. Khan's focus is in the workplace. That does not mean that she's not going to be out in the community and engaging in terms of outreach with various community groups, so that our outreach plans and our outreach recruitment plans recognizes and identifies any barriers that may exist to employment to members of identified groups in our community. So she will play a role, and she has already been out in the community and, has had an opportunity most recently to meet with our Indigenous First Nations around our intercultural competency training, the work that we're going to be doing and discussing with them around the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. So there is work and outreach and dialogue with the community, but it will be focused on delivering internal workplace initiatives.
Okay, so I have a couple comments for my colleagues and maybe a few for our staff. So first, I think we made a mistake when we didn't have an earlier report back on the results of hiring this new position. We should have done that. We didn't do that. We can't go back in time and do that, and that's too bad, because what's happened is we had a pretty significant delay between authorizing the hiring of this new person with $100,000 from assessment growth for this year, 2016, and the actual hiring in September. And then, yes, it takes a while to recruit people, but especially in an area where we're trying to put new focus and increased resources, that kind of delay, from my perspective anyway, I didn't anticipate that it would take that long. And I think that if we had an earlier report back, we would have caught that kind of issue earlier on, and we would have known at month 4 that we hadn't hired anybody. And I think that's our mistake. We should have just been clearer in terms of the direction that we gave to civic administration on that front. It also gives us very little time to accelerate a lot of these things before we're going to have these various report backs on the different aspects of this 3-pronged strategy. And I know in the report we had in February, I had to refresh my memory about some of the things that were discussed in there. There's some discussion in there about talking about doing a workforce census in 2016, and here we are in month 10 of 2016, and I don't know whether the workforce census has been completed, how that's going, if it's going to be completed soon, what the results are. We don't have any idea. And I think when we're talking about metrics, this is a key aspect of it, right? Is we're going to survey our staff and we'll figure out how are we doing. We've done it in the past, but we're not doing it all the time, and we don't have really current information. We're undertaking a new one this year, which I think is great. But I think in the absence of that information, people are in the dark. I'm certainly in the dark about how we're doing as an organization in terms of workplace diversity across all the different dimensions, the visible dimensions, the other dimensions as well. And I think it's an important issue, and we've talked about it multiple times now at council, and I'm glad that we have a new person who's going to help us with some of these pieces that Aidan's team has been working on over the years. And I think we're certainly going in the right direction, but everyone around the horseshoe wants to go faster, and I think that's the piece. And if it's a matter of what's really required is even more resources, well, we should be having that conversation, because when I see things like delaying of the hiring and a big ambitious agenda to move things forward, well, we have to be realistic about what that's going to cost. And we're now this is the piece where I think we made a mistake. We're now in the budget. The budget amendments are going to be coming forward, and I'm sure that there's not something coming forward on this front, and maybe there is. I don't actually know that, but maybe there needs to be. And if we had been talking about this in the summer, for example, maybe we would have had time to do something on this front. So I have some regrets, at least in terms of how this has gone. Not that we've ended up in a bad place in terms of hiring a new person. Based on what Ms. Major is saying, she sounds great, and I think we're going to do some good things here. But I do think that we, in terms of trying to accelerate this piece, that it's not gone the way we would have expected. I think that's why you can get some frustration from Councillor Slee, Councillor Usher, other members of the committee about how things have gone. It's not that we're not doing the right things or trying to do the right things. It's just that we're not doing them very quickly, and I think that is, especially for members of the community, can be very, very frustrating. So I'm interested, if we do know at this point what's happening with the workforce census, since we're talking about it, maybe somebody could address that to give me a sense of, have we started it? Is it close to being completed? Is it delayed?
Sorry, before we move forward, we've put a couple of motions up on the screen, and I don't think we're getting it right. So I'm going to need the mover to look at the motion, and if that's not what he wants to move, please write something down for the clerk. I have Councillor Usher next, and then Councillor Armstrong, but Councillor Helmer, you've put a question forward to staff that you're waiting on an answer back. Are we ready for that answer? Your turn.
So through the chair, we will be, we have brought on, in terms of the resources that you were talking about, we have arrangement, a relationship with an external vendor that will be assisting us with conducting the workforce census. Communications will be going out to staff later this year with respect to what it will be, what the census will be, how they will participate, the timelines for that. So that work has been, although Ms. Khan has not been here, we have been moving forward and with respect to that. So that's, and we can provide you with a more detailed report at a future date.
So I'm aware that, you know, the amount of time between now and the end of the year is not very much. And it sounds as though there's been some preparatory work that's done, but the survey's not started, and that will be happening soon, it sounds like, which is good. Is there any opportunity, you know, we essentially have hired on Ms. Khan partway through the year. We allocated money for the entire year. And can we use some of that money that we didn't spend having the person on earlier to accelerate this process, to, you know, make sure that it's a even more robust survey? You know, I'm sure this is going to take some time, but can we use some of those resources to make this happen any sooner than you're already planning to have it happen? Recognizing that there's, I don't know, 10 weeks between now and the end of the year.
We can certainly take that away and look at that. I don't have an answer for you right now. I would like to consult with Mr. Prince and Ms. Khan and our external vendor to see whether or not there's anything that can be done to advance those timelines. But I don't have an answer for you right now.
So it's okay to just say no if it's not possible. And I did catch Mr. Prince sort of shaking his head, so I'm going to go with no, okay?
Always optimistic, and wanted to go back and talk to him.
Councillor Usher, Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, just because I didn't wish Ms. Khan welcome doesn't mean that I don't. I saw her coming in and I said that I welcome her and congratulations and all that, and I had met her 4 weeks ago at another function where she was announced as the position. And I do respect the fact that she's new and therefore she needs a little bit of time. And I hope that all this pontification doesn't scare you. I think you're a big girl now, and that won't scare me. But I always thought that anybody with the name of Prince could perform miracles. And I thought that if we ask for something today, we get it tomorrow. Just kidding. Madam Chair, I do respect the motion. I went through it and I try to understand it. And I got a couple of questions. We keep referring to the position as diversity officer. And I want to know from staff if that's, because diversity officer is not in that title that you just gave us. And I just wondered if we use the term diversity officer in this motion, if it's appropriate, or should we use the full appropriate title, which is Specialist Organization, Development, Diversity, and Inclusion. And even if we use it once and then refer to it, because we use diversity officer twice. And I think that that's the position we're referring to. So I stand corrected if needs be. I'd also like to be sure that at the beginning, and Councillor Sally may want to look at this, that the update, if I am understanding this right, this is a verbal update. This is an update that we just got. And I'd like to see the word verbal in front of update. Because it's an update that we just got. It's a verbal update. There's absolutely nothing in writing. So we're referring here to an update. I want to be sure that we understand, because a year from now, I don't want to go looking back for that update that was just verbal. So I think we need to add the word verbal. And the other thing, Madam Chair, is one of the words that we use here says, individuals who reflect the diversity of our community. And I respect that word, but I just wonder if what we're really getting at is not the demographics, which is more broad and more specific,
to our community. And lastly, Madam Chair, and I think that this is the most important one, is that we have an A and a B. But in the B, we are trying to include two things, and I would really like to see us, one of them break out as a C, and it's where we say who reflect the diversity of our community, and C, how the role of the diversity officer will evolve. Because we're saying that we're going to receive all A and B. I'm saying it's A, B, and C. So where we talk about how the role of the diversity officer, I'd like to see that as a C because it's a third thing. So it's three different things that we want to receive. So I'm asking for those change. The one with the diversity and demographics, I don't know how anybody feel about that. It's just my way, but I think that the others really need to be changed accordingly. The verbal really necessary in there.
Okay. Thank you for your comments, Counselor. I'm struggling with this, and I'm quite certain our clerk is as well, because none of this motion has been drafted ahead of time. So what I have beside me, with all due respect, is a clerk who is trying her best in altering the motion every single time someone speaks. So what I would really like right now is for the mover of the motion to provide a motion to the clerk. She will then put it up, and then if there's an amendment, we can make that. Because quite frankly, every time someone speaks, she is trying to capture and change this, and then it's no longer right with the person who spoke before. So if we need to take a break or slow down or do something for 5 minutes so that we can get the original motion up and then make amendments, I would be happy to do that. But this changing on the fly is not working for me at all. So Councillor Salee was the original mover of the motion. I will give you the time you need to work with the clerk and make sure that your motion is up on the screen, and then we will resume the discussion.
Is that my chance to respond?
I would like you to either come over here and work with the clerk on her computer or to send her something. I would not like to continue the discussion
So if you
until
let
we
me,
have.
if I can respond, maybe I'll answer your question. I already sent her an email as
Perfect.
But prior to that, like I said, this isn't this committee's fault. What had happened was I had asked for an update on X, Y, and Z. When I asked for the update, we didn't get the update. So here we are, and now people are trying to get that information. If the city manager had an opportunity there at that point to say, no, I'm not gonna give you an update at that time because X, Y, and Z, that wasn't said. There was time in between for someone to communicate that to me, to say to me that we're not gonna be able to provide you with that update. But here I am, trying to work with something and trying to figure something out. Clearly there was a breakdown in communication, or I don't know, but I was just trying to get an update. I thought I came in here today hoping to get an update and then go from there and create a motion from there. But because I didn't get anything, that's why we're here.
Thank you. So I'm going to wait for the motion Councillor Salee sent to the clerk to come up on screen, and then we will resume any discussion. If my comments come out as frustration or directed at anyone specific, they're not. It's just kind of every 2 minutes, my screen is changing and someone's talking about the last motion and we're on the next motion. So I'd like on screen what we're talking about before we move forward, and I'm not speaking again until it's on screen and moved by the mover. Councillor Slee? Okay, there is a motion which Councillor Slee and the clerk have worked on. We're going to wait for that to be moved and seconded. I know it's hard to read from the back, so I will ask the clerk to read out the motion while we get it moved and seconded before any other discussion happens.
The motion is that the following actions be taken with respect to workforce diversity. A, the verbal update from the Managing Director, Corporate Services and Chief Human Resources Officer with respect to the status of the implementation of the position of Diversity Officer be received, and B, the Civic Administration be directed to report back with 1, details of the implementation plan for the City of London's workplace diversity. 2, quarterly reports regarding metrics and the results associated with workforce diversity / demographics in the implementation of the plan.
I want that moved and seconded before we proceed with discussion. Thank you. I do have Councillor Armstrong, and Usher just finished it, but I'll add Usher and Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just through you, I'm happy to support this subject too. I just want to hear back from staff. Is this something that our administration can, meet these commitments, quarterly updates, and so on? I just want to know how they see anything here that's problematic, because now's sort of the time to let us know, so that we're not giving directions and then finding out that it's not doable later on.
I'll look to staff to answer the councillor's question.
Through the chair, a couple of points. My update was with respect to the specialist organizational development, workplace diversity inclusion. So I didn't provide an update with respect to the diversity officer, a diversity officer. We can certainly report back with respect to our progress in terms of the objectives set out in the workplace diversity and inclusion plan. And we're happy to do that report back. The second part of the motion speaks to workforce as it relates to workforce diversity, but as it relates to workforce demographics, that is information that, just so you know, as part of the ongoing plan, that census is not done on a quarterly basis. So it is done, and it's done every 5 years. So I just want you to be aware of that piece of it. So that we will be getting that demographic information. That doesn't mean that we can't update you with respect to progress in terms of what we've been doing as it relates to it, but we won't have new demographic information on a quarterly basis.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor? Ms. Major, we need
Oh,
to...
my apologies.
Well, I think, yes, I mean, now that it's been explained where, when, how often, and what. I think that's clear now, so I'll support this. And we've got it on the record, sort of what can and cannot be done and why. Because data is not always collected quarterly. But I'll go away from this. It seems to me that this type of data, collecting it every 5 years, to me, that seems like a long time in this area. So maybe we can go away with that thought and at some later date, look at talk with staff about what would be involved in tracking it a little more regularly than every 5 years. Because my feeling would be things should be changing, or there should be something every couple years, in any event, 24 months, because things can change in 24 months rather significantly, and it would be good to have that. So in any event, I'll support this.
Ms. Major, do you want to make a correction?
Sure. So just briefly, in terms of the selection of the 5-year mark, we're kind of aligning ourselves with the Canadian census and working along with that. So that's a time frame. There's also a budgetary piece with that, but that's kind of the rationale or the logic between how Mr. Prince had set the time frames in the plan.
Thank you. Councillor Usher?
Sorry, so I got couple of quick points, and I'm going to try to give them all out, and hopefully, Ms. Major, I would really like you to say what you said at the beginning, that your verbal update was, you implied that what we said here was not correct, that it was something else, and I didn't catch that. So could you hold that thought, and I'd like you to address the word diversity officer. I just want to be sure that it's okay for us to use this. We had diversity officer in the past. And I got a little bit of a concern about utilizing that title again on paper, because that's not the true title. And that with respect to the 5 years, I don't know when your timing is, because generally we don't get the census numbers for 2 years after the census. Like, for example, this is 2016. The census is happening now. We won't get the numbers until mid-2018. So could you just address those 3 points through you,
I
Madam
can
Chair?
address them for you, Councillor, because I think you touched on exactly the language change. Diversity Officer, Ms. Major, used the title that Ms. Khan has been assigned. So for the purposes of this conversation, Diversity Officer is going in. I suspect when it goes to Council, we'll use the full title. Ms. Rowe will change that before it goes to Council. So that was the change that I heard Ms. Major bring out. And your other question was in regards to census information and a 2-year delay?
I saw them shaking their heads, so I'm not sure I need an answer, but I need an answer with respect to what you said at the beginning when you were reading this.
Can you use
When you
your
were
mic?
reading this, you said your verbal update was something else.
So through the chair, I wanted to clarify that the motion or the resolution speaks to, I understood it spoke to my providing a verbal update with respect to the implementation of the diversity officer be received. And what I wanted to clarify was, I didn't refer to a diversity officer, I referred to a specialist organizational development, workplace diversity and inclusion.
We've got it now, thank you.
So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, and I don't want to throw any kind of monkey wrench into this or anything, but I was feeling some deja vu here, and I was trying to figure out why, because this is my first meeting of Community and Protective Services as a committee member. And I'm wondering why this all sounds familiar, and it's because the first time that I was in a discussion on this at committee, it was at Corporate Services Committee. So I'm wondering why we're dealing with this same issue at 2 different committees, and where's the proper committee that this should be reported back to? Should it be this committee or should it be Corporate Services? And I apologize, Councillor Slee, for making anything more complicated, and it's usually Councillor Helmer that catches these kinds of procedure things, not me. But I'm wondering what the response is for that.
We've got a very easy answer for you. That will go back to Corporate Services. This came to this committee because at Council, there was a directed update specifically to this committee. So should this motion be approved at council, all future reporting would go back to corporate services. So the councillors made a motion based on an update which was directed here by council, even though it's not the typical committee that we would report into.
And so what was the reason for that council meeting directing it to this committee and not corporate services?
I suspect you would need to speak to all 14 of your colleagues who attended the council meeting and voted to agree to that. The councillor brought forward a suggestion and a very specific reporting point, and council agreed to
It
that.
must have been late at night. I'll give you, okay.
I think so. Does that help with future? We're going to be clean and clear. I have Councillor Van Holst and then Councillor Salee for a wrap up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One question through you to staff. I hope it's been asked already. About how many people do we hire a year? I wanted to know that just so I get an idea of how quickly turnover would even be possible. Although I realize, where people are retiring, they're probably going to be less diverse than the ones who are hired.
So through the chair, we actually have a very low turnover rate. And so that's one of the challenges that we face as a corporation in terms of changing the face of the organization. Notwithstanding that, in terms of our temporary employees, we hire approximately 200 temporary employees a year, and so that is an opportunity there. Our permanent hires are considerably less. I don't have the number for you to give you the exact number, but I can report that back when we report back on these matters.
Thank you. Councillor Salee, wrap up, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and of course, welcome Celia Khan on to the City of London. So I appreciate you coming on board. Of course, there's temperature around this because there's a lot of Londoners who, as I sure said, I get a lot of phone calls about this, and I get a lot of emails, and I get stopped at every opportunity there is when I'm talking to diverse members, and they have almost no confidence in getting in here, right? Quite frankly, I don't know if someone like me could actually probably get hired in the City of London. I'm here as a councillor today, but I don't know if I can get a job here. So what I'm trying to get at is I think we can definitely do something. I think we can move a little bit more aggressively. As far as I was talking about with the metrics, I think I gave you an example by just using what the Police Service Board does. So you just hired 10 people because I see job postings every time because I'm sharing them, right? And so when you're hiring those new people, here goes your self-identification form. Most people, when they're new hires, are probably going to fill it out more inclined than someone who's been around. So they fill it out. You hire 10 people in 6 months. 2 or 3 of them might self-identify. And then you come back quarterly and say, well, 30% are visible minorities, 50% are women, 10% identify the LGBT community, whatever it may be. To me, that just seems like, because whatever we already have in here, we know there's challenges. What I'm talking about as we're attracting and getting people into the door is what we're trying to do. And you're able to easily provide those metrics and say, this is where we're at. The London Police Service Boards does it, and and they've been doing it for a while now. So I think for us, we're trying to do catch up, but we need to do a lot better because we've actually invested financially more than the London Police Service in this area. So I hope we could definitely do a lot more better than them on this front, and especially recognizing that they even have more challenges with policing than versus the amount of jobs and the diversity of jobs that are open to people here. So for us, we should be doing 10 times better than them, I feel. And I really hope that that's what comes in those quarterly updates where you can give us those breakdowns of we've hired 6 people, 3 of them are diverse, or we didn't. And that's what I want to know because I want to know how we're doing moving forward. The past is the past. I can't do anything about it.
Thank you, Councillor. I believe we can open the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Now, colleagues, we have gone past our planned dinner break. I'm looking to see if we're good with a 20-minute break. We have 4 consent items that have been pulled and 2 in-camera reports. So we will be taking a break at this time. It looks like people are looking for a quick break, so we'll go with 15 minutes.
Yeah, okay.
I have a mover, I have a seconder. Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? See you in 15 minutes. By Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Take your time, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my question is a simple one. Just a second, just let me find the page. I lost it. It's to do with the opening ceremony. It's to do with the opening ceremony. And whereas I like it, where it says that this is to do with advisory committee, by the way, on race relations. It's been noted that the meeting was opened with an acknowledgement of Indigenous lands. Yep. And I don't know, I don't remember council ever passing something like this to allow an advisory committee to use that. I have nothing against it. I'm just saying that, and I'm not saying it's wrong or right. I'm just saying that when an advisory committee is going to do that, should they not get permission from us? Because other advisory committees may want to do the same.
Yeah, I can help with that. Really easy. They sure did get permission from us as well as a budget line to support it. So we approved that in their work plan, and that was in February or March of this year. Any other questions?
We approve this statement in their work plan that they could make this statement at their opening ceremony, at their opening of every meeting.
We approved in their work plan and budget, they had very specifically a dollar amount set aside for Indigenous leaders to support the opening of their ceremonies. And so in the work plan, we approved that budget, which by proxy would say absolutely they could do that. I can find that meeting for you where we received and approved their work plan if that would be helpful.
Madam Chair, this says acknowledgement of Indigenous lands. That's what I'm talking about. I don't remember us, I remember us accepting the fact that there will be an Indigenous person to open the meetings. But to stand up, and again, I say to you that I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm not saying that it shouldn't, I'm just wondering if this is something that was approved by council. Because I know that we've used it in the past too, at least for our opening ceremony and when we inaugurated. I'm not looking for an answer if we don't have it right here, Madam Chair, but I think it's something that we may want to check just to be sure that we feel.
So the clerk's looking right now. I can tell you that I don't know that our advisory committee said we would like permission to make this statement. But what I can tell you is in their budget, there was an allocated amount, which was to compensate, I believe, the individuals that were going to be invited in to help them with the opening ceremony, which included the welcoming and the Indigenous lands piece. So I know we are searching the system, but did we ever specifically get a request that says we would like to do this? May we? No, we did not. But I would suggest that by approving their budget where that was outlined, that the council committee did in fact give their endorsement. And the clerk has told me that in February, there was a request to open LDRAC meetings with a statement acknowledging that we are on the traditional First Nation land.
Okay,
So
that's what I'm looking for, that we actually said that. Just because we said that we'll have an Indigenous person there to do a ceremony doesn't mean anything. But that you just read, that's a whole different story. Okay, thank you. That's my question with respect to 5.
Perfect. So if you could move 5, that would be great. You could vote on screen if you haven't already. This is on the 9th report of the London Diversity and Race Relations, and I believe that was their final committee meeting under that name.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Item 6, Councillor Usher, you pulled this one?
Yes, Madam Chair, there are two things. I think that we owe them an understanding of item number 3, that is the Advisory Committee Crime Prevention. I'm just bringing that to our attention. But what I really want to ask about, Madam Chair, is to do with item number 7. Because item number 7 says that the civic administration be advised of the following with respect to provision of child minding services for the public at public participation meetings related to standing committee meetings. A, there'll be more opportunities for individuals to participate in advisory committees if child minding is provided. So I am looking for some clarity on this. Are they advocating that I'm not so sure if I'm being laughed at or what, because I just want to be sure that I could ask my questions comfortably. I don't have one way or another. I just want to make sure that we're clear with this. Does this mean that if we just pass this, that we're going to have to pass the resolution that advisory committees for child minding will be provided at advisory committee meetings? That's where I'm trying to get at. I'm not so sure what they mean. I want some clarity on this.
I believe that Ms. Livingston can speak to the child minding services, and Ms. Rowe is happy to speak to the piece about advisory committees. So we'll start across the way.
Thank you, and through the chair, when we brought forward a report earlier this year on child minding in response to a council request that we look at the issue, that report dealt only with providing child minding for public participation meetings of standing committees of council. At that time, council also then asked that advisory committees be consulted on whether they might benefit from child minding services. So I believe that is what this committee is responding to and what you're seeing in their item for discussion, number 7.
So through you, Madam Chair, I read this that they're sort of requesting that advisory committees be considered, not necessarily that it is so, but that be considered. And I just want to be sure that I'm right, because I don't want, if we pass this, we are saying, yeah, child minding will be provided at advisory committees. That's, they're advocating it, but there's no, if we pass this, we're not saying, yes, you'll get it, because we don't even know if we're going to get it at our public participation meeting. So that's the reason I'm bringing this up.
Through the chair, when we brought the report forward on child minding overall, staff were directed to proceed with the development of an RFP to seek a third-party provider to operate child minding for standing committee meetings for a period of a year, so we could assess the need and understand whether that is something that council wished to continue with after a year period. So we are in the process of doing that RFP work. In fact, we issued it once. There was no response. We're making some adjustments to issue it again. But in addition to that, council wanted to understand whether advisory committees should be added into that. So that's what I believe they're responding to. And I believe all advisory committees have been commenting on this.
So the RFP is right now is for standing committees or for just for public participation meeting at standing committees?
Through the chair, the RFP has not yet been posted. It'll be posted shortly, or reposted rather, but it is for public participation meetings at standing committees only. It does not include at this time the advisory committee piece.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll put that up on the floor to be moved, seconded. I'm gonna look for if there's any other comments. And we'll open the vote on that. There's one other comment, Councillor Helmer.
So I just wanted to pick up on what Councillor Usher was talking about at the beginning of his comments, where he talked about the reference in the report from the advisory committee, sort of asking us to explain why we didn't support their request to have their chair write letters. And it dates back to, they even had a request back in their third report, where they said, you know, about what we wanted to do back in the second report, how come we weren't able, so this is the sort of second time we're seeing it. They're still asking for us to explain. We sent them the resolution, and they're wondering why, and I just wonder what action we're gonna take, if any, to explain.
And sorry, I should have drawn your attention to that. I spoke with Ms. Westlake Powers, who has been supporting this committee, and she intended to attend the committee herself to have the conversation. I believe when the request came, and I could be mistaken because we're going way back, but it was in regards to a budget item, and it was after the budget had already passed. And that was the reason why we didn't support the writing of the letter, because it was at that point moot. But Ms. Westlake Powers was going to attend the meeting and help to answer any questions on how the letter writing would happen in the future. And I believe at the meeting where this came up the last time, we also had a discussion about could we identify another process to allow these letters to be written in a timely manner so that we don't get into this catch-22 as well. So I hope that answers. Go ahead.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
On item number 8, there was a question, Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to say that I really appreciate this report. Reading this report makes me feel like crying, to be honest with you, because it's a really sad report, but you have to read it to really appreciate it. And even by reading it, I'm not so sure that I appreciate it fully. Nevertheless, one of the things that I am concerned about, through you to staff, the numbers that we surveyed, both for the Registrar Week and the point in time, would you say that that is a proportion of the number of people who experience homelessness in our community? Or how close is it to 100%?
Through the chair, I'll start, and if Ms. Richardson feels the need to add more detail. I think we do not know the total number at this point in time of people who are homeless in our community. What the work of Registry Week and the point in time count allowed us to do is understand a snapshot of that picture. And so that's what you see in front of you. I think that as we move over time, by continuing to do things like the point in time count and Registry Week, we'll have a much better sense of that total picture and be able to answer the question of what is the number of individuals who are experiencing homelessness in our community. So that's one piece. The other piece of work that we are undertaking is to introduce an information system within our community that will allow us to much better understand who's accessing our shelters, how people move through our shelters in a much more detailed way. Between those pieces, we should, over time, be able to get to a place of answering the question of what is the total number. But here, all we're able to say to you is this is a snapshot. It gives us a sense of what our community is experiencing and some of the challenges that people are experiencing. I don't know if Ms. Richardson wishes to add anything to that.
So, and thank you for that answer. I suspect it was something like that, but I just wanted to get it in my head how close we were, and obviously, we don't know that. So, a lot of different organizations are mentioned in this report. But there are a few scenarios and a few organizations that I don't see. They may be considered, they may not. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. For example, if you go to LHSC emergency at nights, you're going to see people there who are homeless. And in some cases, the police bring them. In other cases, they find themselves there. And I don't know the scenario, but they tell me that, oh, they're here every night. It's as though they use that lobby and the opportunity to be there to sleep. And you could go there anytime after 11 right through until early in the morning. And I'm not saying it's a whole multitude of them, but you could see anywhere from 2 to 6 at any given time. So I don't know how you count those people or whether we are aware of those people. I'm sure that the police in some cases or the nurses and maybe the doctors might be aware of them. So, and many a times you could be there, and I know that I sound as though I'm not always there. But people have asked me to take them there in the past, and the police would bring them in, and the police would make the same comment. And it worries me about them because I wonder if they're taking into consideration. Can you address that in any way at all?
Thank you, and through the chair. So the first comment that I would make is that this was the first time we conducted a registry week and a point-in-time count. Thrilled to have 15 organizations participating, the number of volunteers. We're going to repeat registry week and point-in-time counts every April. And the more and more groups will join. So I think your suggestion of the London Health Sciences Center walk-in centers at St. Joe's is very good and something we will strive to achieve in our future years. I think what you also raise is important related to where individuals are going to receive their health care. We've done other studies that unfortunately indicate that emergency departments are often used as the primary health care provider for individuals, something we all aim to change. Our report indicates the high number of individuals with chronic health issues that are experiencing homelessness. So again, the more work we do by identifying individuals by name and their circumstances means that we do the better part of the equation, which is supporting them in securing their housing and providing the support that they need in order to have improved health outcomes. So that's the real part of doing the counts, is to match the counts with support immediately to do the work we need to do to support individuals in being housed and supported in their housing. Thank you.
Thanks again. One last little question. I don't know whether it's a statement or a question, but recently I was approached by an organization, Can Voice. Can Voice is on Spruce Street off Dundas, and I've known them for about, as long as I've been on council, so that's about 16 years. They used to be on Wellington Street. They got a nice little location down at the end of Spruce Street, where they do, I forgot what they call it, but individual to individual. And they also have a house at the back where they accommodate, I think it's about 8 people. Nice rooms. They told me that they're gonna have to shut down because the government is amalgamating 4 other organizations together, and the government is only going to support that one. I don't know how much you know about them, but do we have other organizations like them? Because I remember about a year ago, through you again, Madam Chair, somebody approached me about Distress Center. And it seems as though they're doing the same thing what they did with the Distress Center. They amalgamated the Distress Center with 4 other places. So now there's nothing called the London District Distress Center anymore. If somebody has a distress at 11 o'clock or at night or 2 o'clock in the morning, and they start looking up for that number, they won't find it. And even if they know the number and they call, they won't have an answer because it's amalgamated into something else. I find these organizations play a little part, but very, very useful. And to me, every single one person that they could make more comfortable, to me, is worth it. Some of these people become homeless. Some of them are homeless. If they shut down a place like Can Voice, I don't know what's going to happen to the house at the back. But those people might become homeless too. That bothers me. Any thoughts on that could console me after reading a report like this?
Thank you, and through the chair, I'm not sure I'll be able to console you, Councillor Usher. But I will tell you that the Southwest LHIN, so our local health integration network, has carriage of our mental health and addiction services in the region and have been undergoing significant revisions to how organizations provide service to individuals. So I appreciate the changes. I think in terms of our role in homeless prevention, the best work that we can do is to just continue to work in collaboration and in partnership with who's out there who can work with individuals. I think it's always a changing landscape, and so from my perspective, we just need to be alert to that, work with those changes, and sometimes those changes are out of our domain to have any response to. But our job is to be alert to them and to continue to work with individuals and make the right match to the right service at the right time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jen. Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Madam Chair.
I have Councillor Van Holst, then Armstrong, then Homer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got a few questions through you. The first, on page 72 of our agendas, on page 12 of the report, Registry Week and point in time. It says that 26 or 25% of the people were new to London. And so that tells me people are more coming to London than moving to London. People are coming to the city really not prepared to look after themselves. Or perhaps you could fill me in on the implications of this number, please.
Is that you, Ms. Richardson, or is it Ms. Datterspear? Ms. Richardson.
Thank you. And through the chair, it is a fair observation that we have a significant amount of migration into the City of London by individuals who experience a variety of challenges. So in my regard, under homeless prevention, we try very hard to track. We are a regional center for health. We are a regional center for corrections, EMDC, for example, discharges individuals into our community with no address. We have a number of Indigenous communities that are surrounding London. There is a fair bit of migration to and from our communities. So the best I can say is our work is to continue to track that and to put in place program services and sometimes restrictions related to the use of our community services. It again highlights the value and importance of completing enumerations such as Registry Week or Point in Time, and to ask the questions at intake in our emergency shelters. We not only need to know where individuals and families are coming from, we need to work very hard at the rapid housing and diversion from them entering into shelters in the first place. I'm not sure if that helps you.
Thank you. That was helpful. I took part in the point in time survey in the last 2 years. You said that there were restrictions. Could you tell me a little more about that?
Through the chair. One example that I will use is our Housing Stability Bank. This is a service that's available for low-income individuals seeking last month's rent. One of the restrictions is that they have to be living in London for 6 months in order to have access to that fund. So it's a way for us, there's always exceptional circumstances, but it's a way for us, again, to look at putting some restrictions in place. The second example that I'll use is the diversion from our emergency shelters. If individuals are housed and coming into shelter, the work happens at the front door to look at what the circumstances were that mean that they're coming into shelter. It may be a dispute with the landlord that we could intervene at immediately, and they can return home. So I think that those are two examples that I'll give you that try and help us look at our efforts at diversion. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you also address just another issue. When I looked at the people who spend the most time in a shelter, there's about 26, it said here, and it's maybe 1% of the individuals are actually, when I did the calculation, using up about 9% of our resources. And so those people would be, because they don't really use these as emergency shelters, they just live there all year long, moving them out to some other place with some maybe more targeted supports seems to be like it would be an excellent business case. I just looked on through the real estate, we can buy housing at $10,000 a unit. So that seems like a good way to go forward. Could you describe an opportunity there?
Thank you, and through the chair. Our homeless prevention implementation plan is entirely built upon looking at those individuals who experience persistent and chronic homelessness. A Housing First approach focuses on looking at providing permanent housing with built-in supports based on the choice of the individual. We have made significant strides in our community over the last several years in addressing individuals who are persistently in chronic homelessness. I will not disagree with you about the high number of individuals that continue to overly use our emergency shelter system. You'll see it in both the enumeration report and our shelter report. I think we are making progress with looking at our Housing First approach. There is great wisdom in looking at scattered housing, private sector scattered housing based on the choice of the individual. That's part A. Part B is and providing built-in, intensive, in-home support. If it is housing only, we know far too often that housing will fail and they'll end up back in our emergency shelters versus looking at where individuals want to live and anchoring to their housing, to their neighborhood, to their community with the support that they need. So we have a team of about 8 housing finders that are attached to different organizations whose job is to work with our private sector in securing housing for individuals with a priority focus on those that are persistent and chronically homeless. I can assure you that we know the individuals by name. We know them by circumstance, and we're now tracking them very carefully. And it will only, I think our efforts will only be strengthened through the implementation of our homeless management information system. And we will require that our homeless serving organizations all use the same database, which means that we'll share and track in a stronger way. So I hope to show you better results in the future. Thank you.
Councillor Helmer? Councillor Armstrong had his questions answered, so.
Thank you. I got a couple of questions about the enumeration first, and then I got some questions about the emergency shelter side as well. Can you describe to me the magnitude of the problems in terms of recording the information? I went through the training myself, and there's a reference to it saying we had some bad results and we had to exclude them. I'm trying to get a sense of how big of a problem that was.
Through the chair, thank you. Big enough that we're going to try a lot harder with our training next year. So with 75 or so volunteers going out, each of them had a different interpretation of how they would ask those questions and then how they recorded them. So simple examples like birth date. If you reversed the birth date, the information then is not helpful to us about how it's recorded. So that's a simple example, but it gets multiplied by having the number of community participants in it. So I think we solved the problem by doing better training and better monitoring of how to complete the forms. It was our first year. And with that, I think we learned a tremendous amount of using the tools, both that are provided through the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness and the Government of Canada for PIT count. So a little bit of learning about using the tool and what we have to carefully monitor. So I have lots of examples, but I think it comes down to that. If we miss asking a question about gender, then we've lost an opportunity to tick the right box, for example. So thank you.
Okay, so having gone through the questionnaire, I tell you, and Michael would know this from having asked questions. These are some really intensely personal questions, and the interview process itself is actually quite an experience for the people asking the questions, and I'm sure even more so for the people who are answering them. And I'm a little concerned about on the compensation side. So we give people a small token, say it's a $5 TIM card, to recognize, thanks for taking the time to do the survey. And it takes about, I think, 20 minutes to do the whole thing. And considering what we're putting them through in saying, like, we're going to ask you all these questions about, like, what caused your homelessness? Was it a relationship? All these things are so personal. I really feel like $5 is really, especially these are people who generally don't have money, right? They don't have a lot of financial resources. It's part of the reason that they're homeless. I think we need to look at that and say, if we're going to do this on a regular basis, we're going to spend this time with people. It's going to take 20 minutes of their day. We're going to get into some really personal stuff that for some people can be quite traumatic to go through it. And then we're only going to give them $5. I didn't think that was enough. So I wonder through the chair if our staff would speak to that. I realize that it's going to increase the cost of doing the program, but frankly, I think it's money well directed and well spent, and only reasonable to give them a bit more.
Through the chair, thank you, Councillor Helmer. I think it's a great suggestion, and certainly very happy to look at that. I would share that there's a balance between what is fair to give, given people's time, and quite happy to consider that, and I don't actually disagree with you. Thank you.
I should say I do recognize that, if we make it too much, then it starts to become not very voluntary, the survey, and so I'm sure there's a point where you wouldn't want to have it be $1,000 or something. That might be problematic from a research perspective. But okay, so I thought it went very well in terms of getting a snapshot. If you look at the emergency shelter usage as one estimate of how many unique individuals are experiencing homelessness, and then you look at the point in time counts, it looks like we're somewhere in the order of, we're sampling about 10% of roughly of where you might think that we're at. And I think that's actually fairly good for a survey like that. And I really appreciated that it was at multiple different locations. I obviously only experienced the one location myself, but I heard from other people who did other locations that it was good, and you're reaching different people who go to different shelters and service providers. So I thought in general it was a really good success, despite I was disappointed to see that the data, I thought the training was very good. As far as it went, I was pretty clear about how to how to ask the questions, and the people who were sort of monitoring our area, there's one point person to kind of oversee. I thought they did a good job of clearing up ambiguity. So it must have varied, I imagine, by site, different circumstances and different volunteers. Okay, on the emergency shelter side, So I think good news story that we're gone down from 3,400 unique individuals in 2011 down to 2,600. That's really good. And it's too bad that the media is not around. I think that's frankly a very, very good thing that we're getting so many people out of the shelter system. They may still be experiencing homelessness in some form, but they're, at least they're not accessing the emergency shelters, which is not a great place. And we'd like to divert people from there as much as possible. So I think that's really good and worth emphasizing. One piece that I don't understand from this report is sort of the capacity or the utilization rate for the shelter systems on a sort of bed night basis. I know that we've been shifting people and sort of making less space available because we've been diverting resources into housing first, and we don't necessarily want to have as big of a shelter system. It's not clear to me if this is, this is maxed out in 2011 and it's maxed out in 2015, or if it's at 80% in 2015 and it was maxed out. But I just don't know, and I wonder if you could speak to that because it's not really clear in the report.
Through the chair, and thank you. And thank you for recognizing the significant change that came about through a lot of work. And just to highlight that work, in 2012, we operated 360 emergency shelter beds. Today, we operate 320 emergency shelter beds. You would think that that would have meant that occupancy rates would have gone very high to over capacity. But our capacity is maintained around 85%. So I think, to me, that highlights that what we're doing is in the right direction of not only decreasing the number of our emergency shelter beds, but actually solving the problem of homelessness for that individual or that family, because the occupancy is maintained relatively stagnant. And our goal is to continue to reduce the demand on our emergency shelters by investing in getting people home. Thank you.
So you said 40 reduction from 360 to 320, so that's 12.5%. So I think that's a very good sign if the occupancy rate has stayed fairly stable. What's the magnitude of the issue about the shelters for women who are experiencing violence not reporting? Do we have some order of magnitude estimate of how many people that might be and how much we may be underreporting when we just look at the organizations that are reporting?
Yes, thank you, and through the chair. On my page 6 of your report, we can highlight that Women's Community House served 715 unique individuals. So that represented 513 women and 202 children. I do think that the absence of our emergency shelters for abused women and children in this report is, well, it's sad. Sorry, sad's not the right word, but they are funded differently, and so it's very difficult to get the data. We are in conversations with them to look at making sure we can find a way to include the data. You'll note the difference of men and women in our shelters. It's not really a fair and accurate projection when we have another 513 women who are in an emergency shelter. But it comes down to data collection, consent to exchange information, the releases. And sometimes I think a little bit of funding stream work. So I guess the best that I can tell you is that we spoke about it actually yesterday with Women's Community House to look at how we can improve our reporting out in the future. And I think we all see the value in making sure that we have a true count of men and women and youth in our community. Thank you.
Last thing I want to say is I think we're definitely focusing on the right area with the youth shelter. I think it's very clear. You see it in these two reports. And it's not just because I happen to do the point in time count at Youth Opportunities Unlimited and talk to a lot of young people, but I do think you can see it, that there's growth happening in some areas, some sort of subpopulations of people experiencing homelessness, and that the challenges that those younger people are facing are quite unique to their circumstances, and that we do need to be providing that shelter. So we didn't have this report when we were deciding on those things, but I think we saw all those signs as we've been doing the work on the homeless prevention strategy, and I just wanted to commend our staff for bringing it forward. It was very timely.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share about the report? I understand that once this goes to council, it's going somewhere else in the next few weeks. Perhaps you want to share that?
Thank you very much, and through the chair. November 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 950 delegates from across Canada will be coming to London. We are hosting the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness Conference. It's the largest conference they've ever had. We're thrilled. And so part of bringing these reports forward to you tonight is so that we can also have them available for delegates to showcase and highlight how we're solving homelessness in London. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll put the report on to be moved and seconded. And we'll open that vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. Item number 9 was pulled. I don't think we're going to see very many more of these, are we? Would you like to speak about it briefly first?
Through the chair, it is true that as we transition from the city as the service manager in the delivery and development of affordable housing from us to the Housing Development Corporation with Mr. Testisi in the lead role, we will see less of these coming from me and more from the HDC board back to council to let them know. But this is another good news story about the development of 77 new affordable units, and I will pass it to Mr. Testisi for additional information.
Through the chair, just very quickly, I know that we've had one other report that was done back in May. So with the social infrastructure funding that was provided in July of this year, you know, we don't get an opportunity very often to talk about what's been going on with the HDC. And in fact, this has probably been one of the largest years we've had in as long as we've been doing affordable housing, with 3 very large projects going forward. One with the investing in affordable housing funding that was done back in May, and then these 2 projects that are coming forward with 77 affordable units, but actually 100 units of affordable housing because the others are done at market rent. So over the course of this past year, we've been able to develop $12.5 million worth of affordable housing with these 2 projects. And I think most of council has heard my frustration with the way the federal and provincial funding allocations occur. Not that we so badly need them, yet they're in such a protracted time frame that we get the money with a use it or lose it. So part of why you're seeing it in this fashion is because we have to move fairly quickly. The good news is because we have the mechanisms in place locally, we were able to move very quickly. We actually preceded the announcement of the funding with our RFP and had been working on some of these projects ahead of time. And I think the last thing that I'll point out to you is that over the course of the last year, when we talked about the Housing Development Corporation, we talked about there being dials that we can turn, not just new programs and new ways that we can do affordable housing, but we could also look at the foundation that we've built over the last 12 years and say, can we turn some of these dials a little bit? Do we have some flexibility? And to give you an example, we talked about development tools, finance tools, land tools, governance tools, community-based tools. In both of these, in fact, in all 3 of the examples that have come forward this year, all of those tools have been able to be adjusted. And in fact, I'm very happy to say that the money that we used to provide as municipal funding to these projects as a grant to guarantee 20 years of affordability over a 25-year agreement, if you can understand that, these ones are now 35-year agreements. Basically, what we are doing is for less money, we are getting 15 more years of affordability out of these projects. We are building stronger partnerships. In one case, we will have a partnership with Canadian Mental Health Association for 10 units. In the other case, it will be with Community Living Middlesex. And on the municipal allocations, in this case, $2 million more of municipal allocation went into these 2 projects. To understand that $2 million, not only will you be getting it back at the end of the affordability period of 35 years, we don't necessarily want it back. Technically, what it's doing is it's giving the provider an opportunity at that 35-year mark to decide, Do they want to continue to extend affordability or repay it with a minor interest cost? That creates a long-term, so your funding that now went into affordable housing is now becoming a slow but long-term revolving fund. And that starts establishing, I think, what you were looking for in the HDC, which is not just creation. That word sustainability was important to everyone, and that's part of what we're building into this is long-term sustainability by creating funds that can revolve and by starting to look at what some of those new funding mechanisms are. So I'm really happy to put these two projects forward, and thank you for the opportunity to explain them a little bit deeper.
Thank you. And Councillor Usher pulled this because he had some comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, through you, Madam Chair, to Stephen, the federal government funding is non-repayable with respect to the municipal funding, which is repayable over now 35 years, which used to be 20 years. Am I right with that? So it's, the feds are free? And how does that work?
Through the chair, the federal funding goes to the province and the federal funding comes to us as one lump sum with program parameters. Those program parameters, as it relates to new build affordable housing, have eligibility and use criteria. The use criteria does not allow for, at this point, the funds to be used as a loan mechanism. I have been able to negotiate the municipal portion as a loan fund, but I also want to be a little bit careful in explaining that that doesn't necessarily mean that all of the projects as we go forward are 35 years and repayable loans. There may be new tools that we're able to invest. So in both of these, we're working with private developers who are bringing in the not-for-profit partners. When we're working with not-for-profits, we may be able to test other tools, for example, perpetuity agreements that don't require a repayment on the loan. So I think the challenge that I've accepted from council is to see how do these tools adjust depending on what it is that we're doing. These are two very different projects. One is in the county where we do not provide municipal funding, and the other one was in the city where we do. The city one has a community improvement plan attached to it, so reduced DCs. So the models change project to project. The federal and provincial funding is fairly structured. It's our municipal funding that gives us such great flexibility.
That's good. So, in one area here, you said that the total allocation to the city under the SIF is $9.3 million. But that's over 2 years, 2016 and 2017. And the 2016 portion is a little over $5 million. But the two projects don't add up, at least the ones that we're doing, because we are only doing one for $2 million. It doesn't add up. So is there some more projects that will come to make up that additional $3 million? Because you say if we don't use it, we lose it.
Through the chair, there's two other portions to the funding. So this goes back to the report that you would have received in July 19th of this year, where the allocation of that funding not only goes to the new build, which is the focus with the HDC, but there is also a small portion, I believe $600,000, that Ms. Daters-Beers will be administering through housing services, and that will be through a supplement program. And that supplement program will be assisting a few target groups, one of which will be properties where there are ending operating agreements, and these are federal cooperatives that are ending operating agreements. And then the other portion of the money is a portion that we retain as administrative funds. So we have included, this is the full allocation this year. Next year's full allocation will be about $4 million towards new build in combination with the 5.9 roughly that we already have with the investing in affordable housing, giving us about $10 million for next year.
Two other quick questions. I'm tempted to combine them because one is probably very easy. We used to have a charge for certain number of units being to be used for people with disability, and we used to add an extra $5,000 offered to the developer. I don't see that in any of these. So could you help me with that?
Through the chair, two answers to that. One is that we provide the opportunity for developers who have extraordinary costs that are separately managed related to creating accessibility in a unit to apply for an additional $5,000, which has happened in the past, and enumerate how they've expended that money and we allocate it. What we found over the last couple of years, so that was still an option in both of these builds, actually in the last three, and in the last three it hasn't been needed, mostly because of the way we've structured the whole builds, and also the way we are working accessibility and accommodation needs into the entire building. So with the new Ontario Building Code, we're just not seeing the level of need for an additional amount for accommodation. We can actually accommodate. The second part to that is that we're also restructuring a little bit about how we build buildings so that they are not singly one population, but rather looking for mix. So what you're seeing in these buildings, which I believe is fundamental, not only to making strong community buildings, but also to making strong pro forma, strong balance statements, is a mix of affordable and market, of normal units and specialized units, and a mix of populations. So people with special needs, perhaps part of one of our, have to be one of our priority populations within our housing plan, along with people who are low income needs. So we've got all of that built into all of our units right now.
Thank you very much. And lastly, Madam Chair, we used to put $2 million per year in the budget for housing. Do you get that $2 billion in the Housing Development Corporation? And would you like some more? I'm just kidding. Do you get that $2 million?
Through the chair, the $2 million is now allocated to the Housing Development Corporation as part of its core funding. That was part of the base budget decision that was made at incorporation. And my suggestion on where the future goes is that what we said right from the point of creating the Housing Development Corporation was that anything further would really be based on business case. And that rather than, and you know, part of this is too much of what we've done over the past has been looking to the money as opposed to looking to the great business cases. And you know what I'm excited about is this shows what dials can be turned. I think there's more dials that can be turned in the future as well. And I think there's more to come with the National Housing Strategy as well.
Thank you, sir. Keep doing a good job. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Helmer?
Thanks very much, and I think it's really great to see some of the innovations that are happening on some of these projects, especially extending the affordability period. It's one thing to create the units, but you know, 35 years is a lot better than 25. I'm surprised that it's achievable that the projects still work on a financial basis when you ask for things like that, but it's good. And I realize it's not going to happen on every project, but I thought it was useful on some of them. I wonder if you could speak to whether you have targets or a framework for looking at two things. One is the mix of units, what you're talking about, the sort of mix of market rent and affordable in the buildings, because we see quite a difference even in these two projects in front of us. One is about 12 or 13% market, and the other one is more like 27% market. And then also the cost per unit. You know, in the one we're doing in the city, it's $40,000, give or take, per unit. The one that's in the county is $78,000. It's significantly more. And I would expect there to be a lot of variation for sure, but do you have targets for those things where you say, listen, outside of these ranges, I'm not going to do $150,000 per unit. That would be too much. Versus, you know, once you get down to something like 20,000, it's just not, that's not reasonable cost for creating new units.
Through the chair, we have upset limits in our contracts that say a maximum amount of federal and provincial funding of $65,000 per unit and municipal funding of $55,000 per unit. And so about 115,000 if I just did that math correctly. The reality is that we've had some come in at that level, and we've had some come in markedly cheaper. And the challenge is right now is that a 2x4 in London costs roughly the same as a 2x4 does in Toronto. Land doesn't. And land varies, and depending on whether or not you're able to use land or incentive tools like community improvement plans that have DC waivers, or cheaper land in the county. So really what we're trying to achieve is, and you know, part of my work over the course of the last year is to realize there isn't a sweet spot. There's multiple sweet spots, and it's how you are able to negotiate. So what you're acknowledging in the 35 years isn't really about the 35 years. And it's not about the municipal funding becoming a loan from a grant. It's about the capacity to negotiate a solution. And in fact, some of the biggest negotiations, you know, these were in very, very contracted time periods. That's not the way developers work. It would have been better to have longer periods. But we were able to go in and negotiate different unit sizes and create some of the units that we have, for example, in the Albert Street model, may look like they're more expensive from one lens if you look at it without the municipal money, or the other way from another lens. They're completely different. What we were able to build into the Albert Street units is congregate units. So where we've got a 2-bedroom, instead of doing them at the ODSP rate, which we did before, we actually brought in 2-bedroom units that 2 people on ODSP with a support provider using a Housing First methodology could live in together with a support organization helping. That changes the entire pro forma, both from an operating perspective as well as from a capital. So what we're learning to do is run the numbers 15 different ways. And if you saw our offices right now, you'd know exactly what I'm talking about, because there's charts. And what we were doing was negotiating. So there isn't a sweet spot. I mean, right now, what we're looking at is we're looking at an average of about $70,000 per unit incentive. On the municipal side, we're looking at about $45,000 per unit with a repayment coming right back to us. In our May build, not only did you invest $2 million at 27 Center Street, and not only will you get that $2 million back with 2% interest over 35 years, but you got $800,000 in DCs. By being able to know what the levers are in different areas, we're able to negotiate different things. And that's what we're trying to do. So we're still in the baby steps.
Thank you. That's been moved and seconded, so I'm going to open the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, at this point, I'm going to look to see if there are any other matters of additional business. And seeing none, we will need a motion to go in camera. And my suggestion is when we're done in camera, that we adjourn from there. So there are 2 items in camera, and their practice has been to move rooms, so we'll be doing that. So we will open the door and let people know that we're done from the committee room.
Moving camera, not moving camera.
Do it on screen, please. And we'll open that vote. Which room?
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0. And for the purposes of the public's information, the reasons for in camera are as stated on the added agenda. There are 2 reasons. One relating to a personal matter, and the second one relating to a matter of a lease of office space.
And we're headed to committee room 3, please, colleagues. 3.